At the All-Heaven, there was no true ruler, and there was only Brahma Chi that enveloped the universe. The Golden Immortal Realm was also known as the All-Heaven Golden Immortal Realm, and this was a form of praise towards this realm. It described that after an immortal attained the Golden Immortal Realm, the immortal energy in the body would transform and contain the true Chi of Brahma. It was capable of enveloping the universe and creating a new world. It possessed boundless ability, and it was like the lofty and boundless sky. In the immortal dimension, existences at the Golden Immortal Realm were already considered as central pillars and overlords of an area. Zhu Yunso was only a heavenly immortal and was even inferior to a mysterious immortal, so how could he have imagined that his opponent would be a golden immortal? If he knew this at the beginning, then he would have probably fled for his life a long time ago. Unfortunately, there was no room for regret in the matters of this world. Right after he howled loudly, a vast energy of light enveloped down, and the dazzling and resplendent light covered his body, causing others to be unable to see exactly what was happening. How could this be possible? How could a golden immortal be allowed to exist beneath the laws of the heaven Tao in the mortal dimension? How could this be possible? A miserable and terrified shrill cry sounded out, and it was extremely horrifying and caused everyone to be shocked. The men and women by Zhu Yunsu's side originally intended to lend a hand, yet they were sternly stopped by Granny Feijio because that was the laws of light, and it contained Brahma Chi. Merely being tainted slightly by it would cause one's body and soul to be destroyed. In next to no time, Zhu Yunsu's shrill cries stopped abruptly. The light dispersed, causing everyone's fields of visions to recover its clarity. Yet they were unable to find a trace of Zhu Yunso any longer. He seemed as if he'd evaporated into thin air, and he didn't even leave behind the slightest trace of aura and had been completely obliterated. This sort of scene was even more shocking than a bloody one because that was a heavenly immortal, yet he'd vanished so suddenly, so what sort of pain had he suffered before he died? No one was able to imagine it, and it was precisely because of this that it was even more shocking and terrifying. A golden immortal. In an instant, the gazes Fu Yun and the others looked at Qing Shui with carried heartfelt respect and admiration. If this happened in the mortal world, then she could have even been taken to be a god and worshipped in a temple. On the other hand, the expressions of Granny Feijio and the others was bleak and filled with shock. They seemed to have become completely weak, and they'd lost their ferocious and formidable auras from before. A terrifying existence like a golden immortal wasn't allowed to exist in the mortal dimension at all. This was an iron law that was publicly acknowledged in the three dimensions. Yet it just so happened that such an existence was right before their eyes. So how could they dare hold any hope in their hearts? All of you seem to be waiting for someone? Qing Shui lowered her head to look at the ground. An hourglass stood there all alone while the dreamlike and multicolored grains of sand within it had almost flowed completely. This was a very baffling sentence, and it caused Fu Yun and the others to be bewildered. Only Chun Shi vaguely noticed something. The grains of sand within the hourglass on the floor was roughly able to persist for the time for an incense stick to burn. These fellows from the immortal dimension had come in an overbearing manner, yet they intentionally set up a deceptive battle array and used the time of an incense stick to burn as the time limit for Fu Yun and the others to submit. Wasn't this a little unnecessary? The only explanation was that they were ordered to the Spirit Radiance Hall, yet they hadn't received orders on how to deal with Fu Yun and the others. So they used the time of an incense stick to burn as the limit in order to await the return of the person that pulled the strings behind the scene. Sure enough, the expressions of Granny Feijio and the others turned pale as soon as Qing Shui finished speaking, and the last remaining trace of persistence in their hearts crumbled with a bang as they revealed expressions of despair. Even this had been seen through by Qing Shui, so could any good outcome be awaiting them? Seize this opportunity and speak of your objective for coming here. All of you can keep quiet, yet I guarantee that all of you'll die before your backup arrives. But to their surprise, Qing Shui didn't kill them and asked about their objectives instead. Yeah, why did these fellows descend from the immortal dimension? This was what Fu Yun and the others were puzzled about. No matter what, Qing Shui's words caused Granny Feijio and the others to heave a sigh of relief. They firmly believed that so long as they waited for their backup to arrive, then the situation before their eyes could surely be turned around, allowing them to escape death. Actually, we're from the same sect. But we're from the Immortal Dimension's 9 Radiant Sword sect, and we received the orders of the Immortal Monarch to reclaim the sect's saint artifact, the Tao Calamity Sword. Granny Fei Jiu took a deep breath and restrained the terror in her heart as she spoke slowly. According to what she said, Mei Luoxiao and Yu Xianxia from the sect had came over some time ago yet hadn't returned after a long time. Later on, they noticed that the soul plates of Mei Luoxiao and Yu Xianxia had shattered, and they'd perished in the mortal dimension. This discovered caused the 9 Radiant Sword sect in the Immortal Dimension to be shocked, and the Immortal Monarch was furious. Thus he sent them to the mortal dimension to investigate the reason and reclaim the Tao Calamity Sword. Everyone was stunned and didn't dare believe their ears after Granny Fei Jiu finished speaking. Only Fu Yun revealed a cold smile. The 9 Radiant Sword sect in the Immortal Dimension? Who are you trying to fool? You're lying. Fu Yun immediately spoke bluntly. But when he was about to speak of the reason, he forcefully refrained himself instead because this matter was only known to the higher-ups of the sect. Moreover, news of it had been locked down a long time ago. If this information were to be revealed, then it would probably cause great waves to arrive in the sect and everyone would feel they were in danger. Granny Fei Jiu frowned from being criticized by an earthly immortal, and she said, "This is the truth. She really is lying." Meanwhile, Chun Shi spoke coldly. He was clearly aware of this matter, and he'd even personally witnessed Evil Lotus kill Mei Luoxiao and Yu Xianxia. Perhaps everything Granny Fei Jiu said was true. Yet what she said about the 9 Radiant Sword sect in the Immortal Dimension was a lie. Because at this moment, the forces of the 9 Radiant Sword sect in the Immortal Dimension had been annihilated by the sect's enemies a long time ago. Looks like you're looking for death. Perhaps Qing Shui wouldn't believe Fu Yun, but she'd never doubted what Chun Shi said. So as soon as he finished speaking, she'd already made a move. Light surged as it converged into surging energy of the laws, and it enveloped down at Granny Fei Jiu. Granny Fei Jiu's expression changed rapidly. She was unable to figure out how they'd seen through her lies, and she'd never imagined that Qing Shui would actually make a move so decisively without giving her the slightest chance to explain. "Don't kill me. I'll tell you. I'll tell you." Granny Fei Jiu intended to flee yet was utterly incapable of escaping the restraint of light. Her entire body was instantly enveloped as she let out a miserable and horrified sharp cry. Unfortunately, Qing Shui wasn't interested to listen to her at all. Light surged and directly incinerated Granny Fei Jiu, causing her to vanish into thin air and follow in Zhu Yunsu's footsteps. Instantly, only those men and women that followed behind Zhu Yunsu and Granny Fei Jiu remained here, and all of them were terrified to the point their souls almost left their bodies and were in a constant state of anxiety. Before Qing Shui could speak, one of them couldn't refrain from crying out, "I'll speak, I'll speak. I beg Senior to spare my life." Bang! He'd only spoken halfway when a strand of light flames fluttered down onto him and instantaneously incinerated him into nothingness. "Time's up." Qing Shui pointed to the ground. Within the hourglass, the multicolored grains of sand had piled up on the bottom, and there weren't any grains of sand pouring down anymore. Her icy cold, indifferent, and emotionless attitude almost tortured them to the point of falling into madness. "Bastard! Golden immortal my ass. All of you can dream of continuing to live after you kill members of my misty immortal mountain." A man couldn't restrain the terror in his heart any longer, and he cried out madly, "Misty immortal mountain." A bright light flashed in Chun Shi's eyes as he firmly remembered this name. If he wasn't wrong, then the power that this misty immortal mountain represented was the culprit that annihilated the 9 Radiant Sword sect. Coupled with what Tao Lotus and Evil Lotus had said, the person that controlled this power might even be one of the enemies that schemed against the chaotic Divine Lotus all those years ago. When he thought up to here, Chun Shi made a signal to Qing Shui, and she instantly came to an understanding. She stopped wasting time and casually flicked her sleeve, causing all of those men and women to be instantly annihilated. Her direct and decisive methods of slaughter and casual expression caused Fu Yun and the others to be horrified, and they felt even more reverence towards Qing Shui. They were truly unable to imagine how Xianxia had actually leaped up to become a golden immortal in such a short period of time. Not to mention them, even Xianxia felt indescribable shock when he found out about this. And if it wasn't for him having witnessed Xianxia's ability, he would almost not dare believe it. Since you've come, do you think you can leave? Right at this moment, Xianxia seemed to have noticed something, and her clear eyes were suffused with a wisp of a piercingly cold sheen. As she spoke, she'd already vanished on the spot. Everyone was stunned, and then they came to an understanding that Xianxia had probably gone to pursue the backup that Zhu Yunso and the others had been waiting for all along. But no matter what, as soon as Xianxia left, everyone present here heaved a sigh of relief in unison. It couldn't be helped. The might of a golden immortal was too formidable. Even if it wasn't directed at them, it caused them to feel pressure that came from the depths of their souls. Mother Will, Chanan spoke in a low voice, and his handsome face revealed a wisp of worry. It's fine, she'll be back soon. She consoled with a warm voice. Uncle, when did Auntie become so formidable? I remember that during the All-Star meeting all those years ago, Aunt's strength seemed to be inferior to you. The nearby Chun Yu spoke with admiration. The All-Star meeting. In his days, Xianxia recalled that all those years when he participated in the All-Star meeting in Silken City, he defeated Xianxia to win the position of first. At that time, this little fellow, Chun Yu, was only around 7 years old. In the blink of an eye, the little fellow from all those years ago had already grown into a valiant young man. On the other hand, hadn't Anur grown up like this as well? Your aunt isn't an ordinary person. Xianxia sighed emotionally with a smile on his face. These words were something that Fu Yun and the others agreed to. Xianxia was naturally not an ordinary person. She was able to overcome 9 levels of the heavenly tribulation a few thousands of years ago, and she was publicly acknowledged as a proud genius of the dark reverie. Now that she'd experienced 100 reincarnations and eliminated the karma of her previous lives, her footsteps on the path of cultivation had already arrived at a height that others could only look up to. Thump! Meanwhile, a black shadow was tossed into the hall, and it fell to the ground and rolled like a gourd. At the same time, Xianxia's figure appeared once more by Xianxi's side, and she said indifferently, "This fellow is their backup, an expert at the mysterious immortal realm. I think that he probably knows even more, so I brought him back." A mysterious immortal. Everyone was horrified. It wasn't even a short moment since Xianxia had left. Yet a mysterious immortal realm expert had been captured and was lying on the ground like a dead dog while crying endlessly in pain. The visual impact caused by this scene had simply arrived at an extreme. If they didn't see it with their own 2 eyes, no one would dare believe that a mysterious immortal would appear before their eyes in such an embarrassing and sorry state. Some of them were earthly immortal realm experts, yet most of them were young disciples of the 9 Radiant Sword sect. A heavenly immortal was already like the celestial bodies in the sky to them, and they could only look up to such a figure. Yet now, a mysterious immortal was in such a state while the heavenly immortals had been slaughtered a long time ago. At this instant, the feelings in everyone's hearts could be said to be extremely complicated and shocked to the limit. At the end, all of these feelings transformed into a wisp of reverence. It was heartfelt reverence towards Xianxia, and it wasn't faked in the slightest. Xianxia seemed to be utterly unaware of all of this, and she just walked over to Chanan and sized him up from top to bottom before she said, "I'm sorry you had to go through all of this." It was only a mere few words, yet it caused Chanan to instantly reveal excitement, and he was only able to restrain his feelings after a long time before he shook his head and said, "I'm fine." This sort of conversation simply didn't seem like something that ought to occur between mother and son. But it just so happened that no matter if it was Xianxia or Chen, and both of them felt that this was the true son or mother in their hearts. Even if it had been many years, they hadn't changed in the slightest, let alone felt far apart of unfamiliar. She smiled lightly when he saw this, and then he shot his gaze towards the mysterious immortal on the ground. This was a middle-aged man that wore embroidered clothes and a marten coat. His appearance was beautiful as jade, and his bearing was rather refined. But at this moment, his aura was dejected to the extreme, and his countenance was pale while blood flowed endlessly from the corners of his mouth. Moreover, there was even a trace of terror and frustration that couldn't be restrained revealed on the space between his brows. "Name?" Xianxia asked directly, and he didn't show any trace of sympathy. "Qiu Yunxing." The middle-aged man struggled to sit up. He's obviously suffered a heavy injury, and his entire body suffered from indescribable pain, yet he still forcefully endured it and maintained a graceful bearing and silently tidied up his clothes. "Sect. Misty Immortal Mountain. Why did you come here? The Tao Calamity Sword. How many people? I should be the only one remaining." Xianxia and this mysterious Immortal Realm expert who called himself Qiu Yunxing had an exchange of question and answer that was concise and comprehensive. Moreover, Qiu Yunxing was actually rather cooperative and didn't show any signs of hesitation or refusal. This caused Xianxia to be unable to help but take a few more glances at this person. Even though it was only a glance, Qiu Yunxing actually seemed to have understood Xianxia's thoughts, and he said, "Is it very strange? Actually, there's nothing strange about it. I just don't wish to have such a horrible death." As he spoke, he was still tidying up his clothes. His movements were meticulous, and he seemed to have an obsession towards cleanliness. He frowned every time his fingers touched an area of his clothes that was tainted by blood, and he avoided that area. It wasn't difficult to discern from these movements that Qiu Yunxing, obviously a mysterious immortal realm that had an obsession for cleanliness and was extremely particular about his bearing and appearance. This discovered caused Xianxia to suddenly realize that if he wanted to extract information from this fellow, then throwing this fellow into a cesspool might be the best method to achieve it. Unfortunately, Qiu Yunxing had obviously thought of this as well, so he didn't give Xianxia the slightest opportunity to force information out of him. He answered every single question of Xianxia's, and he was a complete traitor. "Why didn't you go directly to the 9 Radiant Sword sect?" asked Xianxia once more. "I like to use my head and not my hands. When I can attain my goal through schemes, then I'll absolutely not take a risk myself." Qiu Yunxing was really extremely cooperative. Even if he was enduring intense pain, he still spoke confidently with composure. "I'm only a mysterious immortal, whereas the 9 Radiant Sword sect possesses 3 old seniors with unfathomable strength and some unknown restrictions and treasures. So I knew the moment I descended to the mortal dimension that I couldn't use force." This was the first time Xianxia had met such an enemy, and he couldn't help but slightly admire this fellow's courage and shrewdness. Was he cowardly? Absolutely not, because this was the mortal dimension, whereas Qiu Yunxing was a mysterious immortal, and he was leading 2 heavenly immortals and a group of servants from the immortal dimension. Wouldn't he be able to get everything he wanted in the mortal dimension? If it was any other mysterious immortal realm expert, the person would have probably trespassed into the 9 Radiant Sword sect a long time ago and utilized the simplest and direct method to deal with everything. But it just happened that Qiu Yunxing didn't act in this way. Perhaps this could be considered to be cowardly, yet now he'd been reduced to a prisoner, but he still faced this in a calm and composed manner, and this wasn't something a cowardly person was capable of achieving. "The reason I chose this place was because I wanted to take control of some elders and disciples of the 9 Radiant Sword sect to be of use to me, allowing me to sneak into the 9 Radiant Sword sect and seize the opportunity to reclaim the Tao Calamity Sword." Qiu Yunxing's voice was still continuing. "In this way, the risk would be reduced to the bare minimum, whereas I would be able to complete my assignment beforehand without facing any danger to my life. So why not? What's the Tao Calamity Sword?" The nearby elder Fu Yun couldn't refrain himself from asking, and the others were extremely puzzled as well. Xianxia was aware, yet he was unable to tell them the answer because it was related to the secret at the 99th level of the Blood Soul Sword Cave, and merely a few people in the entire sect were aware of it. Most importantly, the Tao Calamity Sword was currently in Xianxia's possession, and even the sect master and the other higher-ups of the 9 Radiant Sword sect were unaware of this. Qiu Yunxing laughed as he looked at Fu Yun and said, "Since all of you're unaware, then it shows that this matter is a taboo in your 9 Radiant Sword sect. It's better that all of you don't know, because if you know too much, it much cause you to suffer calamity." Fu Yun couldn't help but be enraged when he heard this. "Are you mocking me that I don't have the qualifications to know all of this? If it was at a normal time, he wouldn't have dared to question a mysterious immortal like this. But this wasn't an ordinary time because one who'd lost his position would suffer much indignity. Moreover, he didn't mind seizing this opportunity to relentlessly beat Qiu Yunsheng that had fallen. Qiu Yunsheng smiled and didn't speak any further. This sort of practically contemptuous attitude successfully infuriated Fu Yun. But he was stopped by the other elders before he could make a move, and they said something to him, causing his expression to change indeterminately for a long time before he restrained himself in the end. After that, Fu Yun actually made an excuse and directly led all of the elders and disciples out of the hall. Looks like there are still some smart people, and they know when to leave and what they shouldn't interfere in. This is a sort of concern towards one's own danger. Qiu Yunxing judged casually as if he'd expected this scene a long time ago. An existence that has concerns would usually be used by schemes. So long as they're used well, one wouldn't even have to use much effort to attain one's desire. She finally realized that this was absolutely a fellow that felt extreme admiration towards the path of scheming, and he possessed substantial knowledge towards seeing through the hearts of others. He possessed extremely great wisdom. A clear understanding of worldly wisdom was true knowledge, and this was the type of person Qiu Yunsheng was. But she didn't like this sort of person as he felt that this fellow had always been showing his intelligence, wisdom, and shrewdness, and he seemed to have a sense of superiority as he held a pearl of wisdom. So in the next moment, she said directly, "Then let me ask you, do you think I'll kill you?" Qiu Yunxing nodded without the slightest hesitation. "Yes, but I presume you've guessed that since I've bluntly spoken about so much and my attitude isn't bad, I'm obviously a smart person. All smart people are afraid of death, yet smart people might know even more than one could imagine, right?" She was stunned, and then he said with an indifferent expression, "But I don't feel like knowing right now." As he spoke, he held Qiu Yunsheng by the neck and turned around before walking out of the hall. These actions obviously caused Qiu Yunsheng to be stunned, and he was slightly surprised and seemed to feel that the development of the matter had suddenly moved away from his predicted path. "What do you intend to do?" Qiu Yunsheng tried hard to make his tone seem extremely calm as he spoke. She didn't answer him, and Shi's expression didn't change in the slightest. "Shi, I've already found out everything about you in these past few days. Moreover, I'm very well aware of your irreconcilable enmity with the Zuoqiu clan and the deep enmity between you and Bing Shitian. I can help you deal with all of this. Could it be that you don't want to hear me out? Give me a chance. So long as you finish listening to what I have to say, you'll absolutely change your mind." Qiu Yunsheng was in slight panic, and he couldn't care about anything and directly took out his trump card. Unfortunately, she didn't feel like listening anymore. At the very least, he didn't feel like listening at this moment. In next to no time, he'd vanished outside the hall with Qiu Yunsheng in his hand. "Aunt, what does uncle intend to do?" The nearby Yu stared blankly as he asked. "He's either going to throw him into the cesspool or dunk him into a toilet. At any rate, he's going to do something that's sufficient to make someone with an obsession for cleanliness to collapse." Qing Shui answered casually. Yu roared with laughter and said, "So that's it. This fellow is too arrogant, and he deserves to be taught a proper lesson. Tactics are like a paper tiger in the end, and it can't withstand a single blow before true strength." She seemed to be lost in thought as he said, "Perhaps this kind of person is capable of achieving great things, yet if he doesn't possess a strength that matches it, then he'll only be a clown that's ordered about by others in the end. Right, he's a clown. All schemes and tricks are unable to resist an open and above-board strike of a blade." Yu chimed in repeatedly, and he felt that An's words were exactly like his thoughts. If others heard that these two little fellows who were only at the rebirth realm actually dared to judge a mysterious immortal as a clown, they would probably feel that these two little fellows had gone mad. But Qing Shui revealed a rare wisp of praise and a smile when she heard this. Exactly. A person that truly possesses great wisdom usually lacks strength the least. Right at this moment, She had returned, but he was alone. Yu couldn't help but ask curiously, "Uncle, where's that cocky fellow?" She thought for a moment and said, "You don't want to know. Otherwise, I guarantee you'll be unable to eat for 3 days and 3 nights. As he finished speaking, he himself couldn't help but shake his head without end, and he seemed to be unwilling to recall those scenes from before. Chun Yu couldn't help but be astounded when he saw this, and he truly didn't dare imagine how horrifying the consequences that mysterious immortal faced were. That fellow will probably become obedient by tomorrow. At that time, we'll set out to return to the 9 Radiant Sword sect. All right? Chun Shi raised his eyes and looked at Qing Shui. Qing Shui nodded with a meek and happy appearance. Chun Yu couldn't help but feel slight admiration towards his uncle, and he was really curious about exactly how Chun Shi had captured the heart of this beautiful and formidable aunt of his. If Chun Shi knew Chun Yu's thoughts, then he would probably immediately become angry from embarrassment, because the scene from all those years ago was truly a bit too absurd, bizarre, and unsuitable for children. Most importantly, he was in a passive position then, that night, within an elegant room in the Spirit Radiance Hall. Chun Shi personally prepared a sumptuous feast, and he enjoyed it with Qing Shui, Chan Yu, and Chanan. Only the 4 of them were present, and Chen Shi wasn't willing to allow others to disturb this moment of private time between loved ones. During the feast, Chun Shi seemed to have transformed into a garrulous old woman that talked without end, and he tossed out a pile of questions without end. For example, how his younger brother Chun Hao was, how the Chun clan had changed, how Song Lin, Duanmuze, Du Qingxi, the Old Turtle King, the Nine-Tailed Fox King, and the others were. For example, there were too many questions. Chun Yu spoke freely and frankly when facing this, and he answered every single question Chun Shi threw at him. On the other hand, Chun complimented him from the side and covered the things he missed, whereas Qing Shui listened silently at the side. She frequently glanced at Chun Shi before glancing at the 2 little fellows, and her face was covered in a warm and happy expression. At this moment, even though it was calm and flat, yet it was a rare moment of happiness for the 4 people that were present here, and it was something that was impossible to obtain with any treasures of the heavens and the earth, because this sort of gathering was too difficult to come by, and it seemed to be even more precious and valuable instead. Perhaps when they thought about this day many years from now, it would still be an unforgettable sweet memory. Dawn the next day, Chun Shi, who was excited all night and hadn't slept, seized the moment before the sky brightened completely to walk out of Spirit Radiance Hall. When he returned once more, there was another person following by his side. It was Qiu Yunsheng. At this moment, his clothes were neat, his hair was tidied up meticulously, and his bearing was graceful and elegant. He seemed like a noble middle-aged man that lived comfortably. But his expression was extremely unsightly, and it could even be described as terrible. His features had almost twisted together in bitterness and was completely ghastly pale. Moreover, there was a wisp of a dazed expression that frequently suffused his face, and he seemed as if he'd experienced a great unexpected event that he couldn't bear to recall, especially when his gaze descended onto Chun Shi, who walked by his side. He was like a mouse that had seen a cat, and his gaze was filled with terror and fear that couldn't be restrained. This couldn't help but make others curious. Exactly what had this extremely wise and quick-witted mysterious immortal suffered last night to become like this? Besides his bearing still being casual and elegant, his expression simply seemed like that of an idiot that was born stupid. Only Chun Shi and Qiu Yunsheng were aware of the answer to all of this, but both of them wouldn't speak about it. Chun Shi was unwilling to speak about it because mentioning it would disgust him to the point that he was unable to bear it. On the other hand, not only did Qiu Yunsheng not dare speak about it, he wasn't willing to recall it because everything that occurred throughout last night was the most miserable night he'd ever experienced. And the term living was worse than dying wasn't enough to describe a shred of it. He was afraid, completely afraid. If it was possible, he would rather leave right away and was unwilling to ever see Chun Shi again for his entire lifetime. This fellow is simply like a devil. When he thought up to here, Qiu Yunsheng couldn't help but be overcome with sorrow and melancholy. He felt that with all his knowledge and peerless ability to plan and think, he'd actually suffered such consequences, so the heavens were simply fucking blind. Lord Mysterious Immortal, where did you go last night? Meanwhile, Chen Yu noticed Qiu Yunsheng that walked into the hall, and he couldn't help but chuckle and tease Qiu Yunsheng. Qiu Yunsheng instantly shuddered when he heard this, and his figure shivered. He seemed weak while his face was covered in a dejected and dispirited expression. I'm already utterly convinced of your superiority. So can this matter not be mentioned in the future? Qiu Yunsheng looked at Chen Shi in a practically begging manner as he asked carefully. That will depend on your behavior, said Chen Shi indifferently. Qiu Yunsheng's spirits were refreshed, and he said right away, If I cooperate fully, then when do you intend to let me go? Chen Shi said casually, Haven't you understood everything about me? Then I'll let you go when I've defeated the Wuxia clan and taken revenge for the Immortal Dimension's 9 Radiance Sword sect. All right? Qiu Yunsheng seemed as if he was struck by lightning when he heard this, and his face turned pale. The Wuxia clan? Take revenge for the 9 Radiance Sword sect? He fucking intends to torture me for eternity. As a mysterious immortal from the Immortal Dimension, no matter how ignorant he was clearly aware of how terrifying those powers Chen Shi mentioned were, and thinking about overturning any one of them was something unimaginable. Yet now, Chen Shi had actually said that he would only let Qiu Yunsheng go when he finished all of this. This. Qiu Yunsheng couldn't find a word to describe his feelings at this moment, and he felt like crying, yet had no tears. What? If you can't accomplish it, then... Chen Shi glanced at him and spoke indifferently. Chen Shi's voice hadn't finished resounding in the air when Qiu Yunsheng revealed a solemn expression and interrupted him. Leave it to me. His tone was resolute while his expression was firm, yet he was rather apprehensive in his heart instead. Couldn't be helped. If he wanted to live, then even if he was asked to climb a mountain of swords and plunge himself into a sea of flames, he could only summon up the courage to agree. This is how a true, ambitious person acts. Chen Shi slapped Qiu Yunsheng on the shoulder and said, Don't be so pessimistic. You can imagine that the day will come when great figures with monstrous authority and great powers in the Immortal Dimension will be overturned by your numerous schemes and plots. Besides you, is there anyone else that can experience that sort of feeling of accomplishment? Qiu Yunsheng stared blankly at Chen Shi as he said, It does really sound good. Chen Shi roared with laughter. It isn't just good. When that day comes, it's bound to be the best and most brilliant moment of your life. Qiu Yunsheng stared at Chen Shi for a long time before he said solemnly with a serious expression. Even though I know you're deluding me and teasing me, but my desire has really been aroused. It's like the muddled and immature period when I was a pure youth, and it's like I've suddenly found my life goal. Then work hard. Chen Shi patted him on the shoulder once more. Yet Chen Shi didn't take it seriously in his heart. The muddled and immature period when you were a pure youth? You're even able to speak such things? You're simply too shameless. When it came to this sort of fellows that were full of lies and tricks, one could only believe their actions and not their words. Otherwise, one might be tricked by them. Qiu Yunsheng seemed to have fallen into deep contemplation instead, and he stopped talking. Only the depths of his eyes were actually faintly burning with a wisp of a mad and excited expression. There were numerous white clouds that drifted like cotton on the clear blue sky. A treasured vessel smashed through the waves of air as it flew towards the 9 Radiant Sword sect. On the treasured vessel, Qing Shui thought for a moment before she asked in the end. You intend to use that fellow? Chen Shi glanced at Qiu Yunsheng, who was sitting cross-legged at the corner while thinking hard with a frown on his face. And then Chen Shi pondered deeply before he said, Even though I temporarily possess no knowledge about how enormous those enemy powers in the Immortal Dimension are, I'm very clearly aware that it's extremely difficult to overthrow them completely by relying on my strength alone. So you intend to build your own forces? Qing Shui seemed to be lost in thought as she said, This isn't a bad idea. After all, comparatively speaking, there's a limit to one's strength in the end. It's easy to kill a single enemy, yet it's extremely difficult to flatten an entire large power. Chen Shi sighed lightly and muttered, I only have this thought for now. As for how to put it into effect, it will depend on the situation in the Immortal Dimension. I'll help you at that time, said Qing Shui in a light voice. I know. Chen Shi smiled. That fellow is only temporarily controlled by me via restrictions. Since you intend to use him, then we must eliminate all future worries. Qing Shui suddenly turned around and walked towards Qiu Yunsheng. She was stunned. Yet he didn't stop her in the end. Qiu Yunsheng was a mysterious immortal realm expert after all. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to completely control Qiu Yunsheng. Moreover, Qiu Yunsheng possessed shocking wisdom and was extremely shrewd. Perhaps the only way to make Qiu Yunsheng commit himself full was by using some forceful methods. After a short while, Qing Shui walked over and said, "That fellow really is a smart person, and he was extremely cooperative. In the future, unless he's able to kill me, otherwise he would absolutely not dare to do anything harmful to you." A wisp of warmth surged out into Chen Shi's heart. He didn't say anything and just stretched out his hand to hold hers, and it felt cool and soft as if it was without any bones. Qing Shui's figure stiffened, and she glanced at Chen Shi before she quickly recovered her calm. This large hand was extremely warm. 6 hours later, the 9 Radiant Sword Sect was far away in their field of vision. Chen Shi put away the treasured vessel and flew towards the entrance with Qing Shui, Chen Yu, and Chanan. He was all alone when he left that day. Now, he was accompanied by his wife and son, and the changes in life were really impossible to be predicted. It's Elder Chen Shi. My God! He has finally returned. Quickly report this to the martial uncles and sect master. When they saw Chen Shi's figure, all the disciples that guarded the entrance were stunned, and then they revealed expressions of wild joy as they started crying out loudly. Their excited and happy appearances simply seemed as if they'd gone mad, and it caused Chen Yu and Chan to be flabbergasted. What? Chen Shi has returned. Ha ha ha. I knew that this kid will surely be fine. Bastard. Why did you only come report it now? Quickly go notify the other elders to go greet Chen Shi at the entrance with me. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the depths of the 9 Radiant Sword Sect, waves of clamorous noise suddenly resounded out, and then numerous rays of light charged into the sky as all the higher-ups charged towards the entrance in a vast array under the lead of the sect master, Wen Huading. For a time, the entire 9 Radiant Sword Sect was completely stirred. The clear sky was filled with dazzling and resplendent streaks of light and whistling that sounded like the roar of dragons. It destroyed the previously tranquil and quiet atmosphere, causing it to suddenly start seething and become extremely bustling and clamorous. At this moment, Chen Yu and Chan almost didn't dare believe their eyes, and they were extremely dazed. Even if they knew since the beginning that Chen Shi was renowned throughout the world now, and he was a figure that stood supreme over all his peers. But when they saw this bustling and vast scene before their eyes, their hearts still suffered unprecedented shock. One day, I'll become a figure like Uncle as well. Chen Yu clenched his fists tightly while his excited expression revealed staunchness. I only hope that Father won't be disappointed in me. Chen puckered his lips and spoke after a long time. That supreme glory and brilliance was personally created by his father, and it was a type of heavy pressure to him. It urged him to not dare slack off and be deeply afraid of being unable to chase up to his father's footsteps. Yes, he only hoped that his father wouldn't be disappointed in him. It was like a busy street with a hubbub of noises before the entrance to the 9 Radiant Sword Sect. Those disciples that hadn't met Chen Shi before stared wide, their eyes wide open, and they looked at him with unblinking gazes. They saw that he was tall and handsome, and every move he made carried a peerless, graceful bearing, causing them to cheer endlessly in their hearts. Those disciples and elders that knew Chen Shi had prideful expressions instead, and they told the newbies by their side about the various brilliant deeds Chen Shi had accomplished while feeling pride from it as well. Qing Shui glanced at Chen Shi and said, I never imagined that you're rather welcomed. Chen Shi was slightly stunned as well when he saw this scene. At this moment, when he heard Qing Shui teasing him, he couldn't help but rub his nose and shrug. It's better than no one paying any attention to me, right? As he finished speaking, he was actually sighing with emotion in his heart. He still remembered that when he'd just entered into the 9 Radiant Sword Sect, the East Radiance Peak's elder Yu Qi caused trouble for him at every corner. Yet now, not a single person in the entire sect dared look down upon him. This was power and influence. At the bottom of it all, it came from a single thing: strength. Meanwhile, the sect master, Wen Huiting, had led Elder Lai Peng and the other elders to arrive here, and all of their eyes lit up while they felt extremely happy when they saw Chen Shi. But when their gazes arrived onto Qing Shui, all of them were slightly stunned before their pupils constricted, and then a wisp of shock that couldn't be concealed flashed past their eyes. Chen Shi was naturally well aware about the cause of this because no matter how Qing Shui restrained her imposing aura, she was already at the golden immortal realm in the end. Not to mention when Huiting and the others, even an ordinary heavenly immortal or mysterious immortal would feel instinctive pressure upon meeting her. But he wasn't willing to explain, and he just smiled as he walked forward and greeted Wen Huiting and the others. After that, he introduced Qing Shui, Chanen, and Chun Yu to the everyone. When they found out that these two youth with extraordinary natural endowment were Chen Shi's son and nephew, the eyes of all the elders lit up, and their hearts burned endlessly with desire. Chen Shi, these two little fellows don't have a master yet, right? Why don't they follow by side? An elder was unable to restrain himself and looked at Chen Shi with hope. An elder that lived in seclusion immediately objected. No! How can these two good seedlings with peerless natural talent be wasted in the hands of you, old freak Meng? It's better to allow me to guide them personally. Elder Luo, aren't you a little too greedy? This won't do. I want one as well. Humph. All of you are insatiable and unreasonable. Even though I'm not the strongest in the 9 Radiant Sword sect, if it's in terms of imparting cultivation techniques, then if I call myself the second best, no one would dare call himself the best. Instantly, the scene was in chaos as all those elders seemed like wolves that had seen 2 rabbits, and their faces flushed with anger as they argued and were on the verge of fighting each other. The jaws of all those disciples before the entrance almost dropped to the ground when they saw this, and they didn't dare believe that the higher-ups of the sect that were usually extremely dignified and mighty like gods would suddenly become like this. Bearing? Dignity? All of that had vanished. Chen Shi was dumbfounded, and he looked at Wen Huiting. However, Wen Huiting coughed dryly and said, Chen Shi, even you know that I haven't taken a disciple in many years. These two little fellows aren't bad. So, how about, that won't do. Those elders instantly stopped arguing and objected in unison. Chen Shi was slightly helpless, and he glanced at Chun Yu and Chenin while seeming to be saying, look, both of you little fellows are even more welcome than me. On the other hand, Chun Yu and Chenin were stunned, and they were caught slightly off guard by the scene before them. Are you two little fellows willing to take me as your master? So long as you're willing, then I'll agree to anything all of you want to learn or possess. An elder directly moved his gaze onto Chun Yu and Chenin, and his voice was extremely amiable. Can you make me as strong as uncle? I just want father to not be disappointed in me. The first reply was Chun Yu's, and the second was Chan An's. But no matter which answer it was, it caused the expression of that elder to stiffen and reveal despair. It wasn't just him, all the other elders stopped talking and arguing, and they had slightly flabbergasted expressions. They asked themselves, regardless of peak-grade Dao arts, miraculous medicinal pills, or formidable magic treasures, they would dare to promise all of it. Yet only these two requests were something that they didn't dare guarantee. After all, there was only a single Chen Shi in this world, and he was already standing at the peak of the mortal dimension while his strength was peerless in the world. How could they dare guarantee that they were capable of teaching these two little fellows to the point of being as strong as Chen Shi? Can you to give us a different request? An elder refused to give up. Being as strong as my aunt is all right as well. Chun Yu chuckled as he raised his head to look at Qing Shui. Those elders were instantly dispirited when they heard this, and they didn't speak any further. Qing Shui? That was an existence that wasn't inferior to Chen Shi, and her current aura was like an abyss that was even more terrifying than Chen Shi. So how could they accomplish this? Chen Shi glared at Chun Yu because he was clearly aware that these two little fellows didn't intend to take these seniors of the sect as their masters. So they intentionally spoke of such requests. Chun Yu smiled embarrassedly and scratched his head. Meanwhile, when Huiting said with a smile, all right, Chen Shi has just returned to the sect, so if there's anything, we can speak about it after everything is arranged. All of the elders knew there was no hope of taking Chen Yu and Chen and as disciples when they heard this, and they stopped mentioning this matter immediately. They were clearly aware that with elders like Chen Shi and Qing Shui, these two little fellows didn't need to take a master at all and would still be able to grow swiftly. The vast welcoming group instantly started traveling back into the sect. On this day, the news of the 9 Radiant Sword Sect's West Radiance Peaks Master, Chen Shi's, return seemed as if it had grown wings and spread throughout the entire cultivation world, causing the entire world to be in an uproar. After all, he'd trespassed into the Heavenflow Dao sect by himself all those years ago, and that battle where he slaughtered Bing Shiyan's clone while at the earthly immortal realm was truly too shocking. It could be said that in the current cultivation world, Chen Shi's name was like the scorching sun in the midday sky, and it reverberated like thunder in the ears of both young and old. If there was a cultivator that still didn't know who Chen Shi was, then that person would surely suffer the disdain and contempt of all. West Radiance Peak. When Chen Shi arrived here with Qing Shui, Chen Yu, Chenin, and Xiao Yunsheng, he saw shadows of people moving about on the mountain, and the figures of many familiar people were already waiting here. His eldest senior brother, Hua Moliai, second senior brother Lu Shang, third senior brother Yi Qinzi, fourth senior brother Duan Yi, fifth senior sister, a Ju, sixth senior brother Qing Yu, Ling Bai, Mu Kuei, Bai Kuei, Amon, Mortis, Shuyan, Chan Yen. Just looking at them from afar caused a wisp of warmth to be unable to help but surge out from Chen Shi's heart. All of this clearly told him that even if the path to the Tao was difficult and covered in difficulties, he wasn't fighting by himself. This was more than enough. On that night, the feast on West Radiance Peak flowed smoothly while the sound of laughter was ceaseless. When reuniting after a long time, it was only natural to enjoy themselves together with wine. On the other hand, Chen Shi was very clearly aware that gatherings like this would probably grow fewer as time went by because Qing Shui would be leaving a month from now, whereas he would be preparing to charge into the 9th level of the earthly immortal realm as well. This was life. When the journey was without end, gatherings were bound to be too short. Dawn the next day, the sky had just lit up. Chen Shi woke up from his meditation. At this moment, a wave of clamorous noise was already sounding out from outside his courtyard. He pushed open the door and saw that Chen Yu and Chanin were carefully practicing Dao arts. Moreover, Ling Bai, Mu Kuei, Amon Bai Kuei, Chen Yen, and the others were standing at the side while watching them, and they frequently spoke with praise. When he saw this scene, Chen Shi couldn't help but have a flash of inspiration and decided on something. I think that since I intend to pass down some of my comprehensions to Yuer and Anur, why don't I set up a Dao platform and allow all the disciples of the 9 Radiant Sword sect to listen to it? In this way, I would be able to live up to the kindness the sect master and the others have shown me. Chen Shi came to Qing Shui and told her of his thoughts. You can. Qing Shui nodded. She knew that Chen Shi wanted to hear her opinion, so she pondered briefly before she said, imparting knowledge has always been a deed of boundless virtue. Early on during the primeval times when the various Tao orthodoxies hadn't been formed, some sages and great figures that possessed extraordinary wisdom would set up Tao platforms to impart their knowledge and widely invite the living beings in the world to discuss the Tao with them. This was the beginning of the formation of Tao orthodoxies. When the living beings that listened grew in number, there would be a sort of master and disciple relationship and the feeling of coming from the same sect. Along with the passage of time, it gradually formed into a Tao orthodoxy. When she spoke up to hear, Qing Shui's eyes were filled with light as she stared at Chen Shi and said, when the day you're able to explain the Tao to all of the living beings in the 3 dimensions, then you would be the true ruler of the 3 dimensions. Chen Shi was stunned, and he shook his head as he laughed bitterly. I don't dare have any excessive desires to be the ruler of the 3 dimensions. I only hope to leave my comprehensions behind before I ascend into the immortal dimension and help some disciples of my 9 Radiant Sword sect take a few less detours. Oh, you? Qing Shui smiled and didn't speak any further. At the morning on that very day, a shocking piece of news spread throughout the entire 9 Radiant Sword sect at shocking speed. Elder Chen Shi is about to set up a Dao platform to impart his profound knowledge, and anyone can go listen to it. When they heard of this news, no matter if they were from the outer court or inner court, all the disciples seemed to have gone mad and surged towards the West Radiance Peak at the first possible moment, as they were deeply afraid others would get there before them if they were slow. When faced with this, the sect master, Wen Huiting, instantly ordered all the elders to head to the West Radiance Peak to maintain order and prohibit noise. Those who violated this rule were stripped of their qualification to listen to Xianxia. At noon, the sky above West Radiance Peak was covered in clouds and mist. When Xianxia arrived here, he couldn't help but be shocked by the magnificent scene before him. If one looked down from the sky, one would notice that the surroundings of the Tao platform and even the entirety of West Radiance Peak was covered in people, and all of them were sitting cross-legged with solemn expressions. They were actually over 10,000 in number. According to Xianxia's knowledge, if all the outer court, inner court, elite, core, and various other types of disciples in the 9 Radiant Sword sect were added together, it was around this number. In other words, almost all the disciples in the entire sect were gathered here. But in next to no time, he recovered his calm, and he walked over to the center of the Tao platform before he sat cross-legged there. Amongst the 3,000 grand Taos, each possess boundless profundities, and it's extremely difficult for us cultivators to completely grasp all of them in our entire lifetimes. From today onward, I'll merge everything I've learned and comprehended all along my path into my teachings. Xianxia pondered for a moment before he spoke gradually, and his voice was resounding like the morning bell and clearly spread throughout the heavens and the earth. At this moment, the expressions of everyone on West Radiance Peak became solemn as they listened respectfully, and the atmosphere was deathly silent, tranquil, and carried a solemn and respectful aura. The heavens and the earth were covered in an expanse of tranquility and solemnness. Only Xianxia's voice was like the sound of nature that drifted slowly through the air while carrying a calming and meditative aura, causing the air to seem to be filled with strands of the aura of the Tao that swayed in the sky. All the disciples of the 9 Radiant Sword sect sat cross-legged, and their expressions had transformed from their early excitement to an expression of tranquility. At this moment, even the beasts on West Radiance Peak lay silently on the ground and listened in meditation. Xianxia stood alone in the distance. As she gazed at the tall figure that sat cross-legged at the center of the Tao platform, her gaze overflowed with light and was suffused with ripples of extraordinary splendor. During the primeval times and before the various Tao orthodoxies were formed, great sages would impart their knowledge without discrimination of sect or origin, and all the living beings in the world could listen to their profound words and participate in the discussion of the Tao. At that time, fiend gods moved freely through the world while the sages were numerous like the clouds. The Tao was in a period of great prosperity and all clans were contending with each other. It was absolutely the most brilliant and resplendent period in the cultivation world. Unfortunately, along with the passage of time, the cultivation world started to form a system that was rigidly stratified. Incidents of Tao orthodoxies slaughtering each other from conflict started to occur, and the situation where the Tao was passed down to all was no more. The scene before her eyes caused Xianxia to see a strand of the aura of the ancient times. Perhaps only such broad-mindedness will allow a person to compete for supremacy with the world and stand proudly at the peak of the grand Tao in the 3 dimensions. This was her understanding. If one kept holding on selfishly to one's own knowledge, then it would be impossible for that person to attain great accomplishments. Of course, the great accomplishments that Xianxia held in her mind related to those that were considered great accomplishments when compared with the ancient times until now. As far as she was concerned, even though Xianxia was currently restrained by his cultivation, causing his understanding to be constrained to the mortal dimension. But so long as he continued forward firmly while possessing this broad-mindedness and bearing, then his path in the Tao would be so wide that it was bound to be immeasurable. The Tao was nameless, yet the strong named it the Tao. The profundities of the Tao are contained in the heavens and the earth, and it's reflected on everything in the world. If one's heart is clear, then it will glow, and the Tao would be everywhere. The heavens and earth were formed as yin and yang were divided, and the birth of the 5 elements established the world. Wind and lightning give life to all while the rays of sun bring boundless light, and the 4 seasons cycle without end. The truth of the Tao is contained within everything. Technique is the representation of the Tao, and Tao arts, His voice that was clear like the morning bell continued to spread out slowly. Xianxia's expression was calm and composed, and his entire body emanated a lofty and solemn aura. Even though he was only imparting all that he'd learned and experienced throughout his journey towards the Tao, and it couldn't be considered to be world-shocking or compare with the sages of the ancient times, to those disciples of the Nine Radiant Sword sect, it was like they were suddenly filled with enlightenment. It caused all of them to obtain great comprehension and lose their minds in this moment of sudden enlightenment. This was what the phrase all Taos and techniques are equal. It's usually what one needs the most that's capable of striking one right at the heart. Not to mention everything Xianxia had learned were supreme Tao scriptures and grand Tao profundities that had attained perfection. For example, the all-heaven truth eternal Tao scripture grand rebirth technique, and the grand Tao profundities of the five elements in yang, wind, lightning, and so on and so forth. All of these comprehensions and experiences were explained by him in the most succinct and vivid way. Not to mention those disciples of the sect, even some elders were immersed in it and were unable to cease listening. At the end, even some elders that lived in seclusion started to listen to him and verify all they'd learned over the years. It was like two experts were sparring in experience, and they obtained great benefit from it and solved many questions and problems that troubled them. Xianxia seemed to have not noticed all of this. At this moment he'd fallen into a strange state. His mind was pure and clear while numerous comprehensions rose up successively into his heart. The process of imparting the Tao was a process of organizing and summarizing everything one possessed, to eliminate the unwanted and retain the essence. It was like reading. Some were able to read a book to the point of obtaining deep understanding, and some were able to read a book to the point of being capable of summarizing it, whereas there were some that were capable of obtaining deep understanding and then summarizing it. Obtaining deep understanding was grasping all the knowledge within the book and drawing inferences from it, whereas summarizing it was the elimination of the unwanted to only leave the essence behind. This process was like the process of life. One experienced the passage of time, summarized one's gains and losses, and then became immersed in one's comprehensions. Only in this way could travel through the path of life to a farther and higher point in an easier manner. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to be immersed in accumulating strength, and he was summarizing everything he'd felt and comprehended on his path before ascending into the immortal dimension to become a heavenly immortal. When he attained the heavenly immortal realm, it would be a new beginning for him, and this sort of summary would pave a wider path for him, allowing him to walk even more steadily and firmly on his new journey. Time flowed in the blink of an eye, and it was almost a month later. On this day, Xianxia was seized by a sudden impulse and awoke from the strange state he was immersed in, and his eyes surged with the movement of stars and the vast and deep the universe. The surroundings were deathly silent as all the disciples of the Nine Radiant Sword sect were still immersed in their comprehension, and they either had frowns on their faces as they pondered with concentration, or seemed to have comprehended something, or remained still like a mountain, or had grins on their faces. There was actually not a single person that noticed the voice that was indistinct like the sound of nature and sounded like the chanting of sacred teaching had vanished. Xianxia didn't disturb them when he noticed this. He stood up and silently arrived before Chen Yu and Chen En, and he woke the two little fellows from their meditation before leaving the Tao platform. At the side of the sword purification pool and within the courtyard, Qing Xiui stood there silently all by herself, and as the rays of sunset illuminated her picturesque face, it was suffused with a beautiful and dreamlike sheen, causing her to seem like a celestial maiden that was bathing in divine radiance. She seemed to have been waiting here for a long time, and she smiled lightly when she saw Xianxia, Chenin, and Chunyu arriving. "I'm about to leave." Her voice was clear and ethereal, yet it carried a unique feeling of tranquility. But when it entered into Chenin's ears, it caused his eyes to turn red, while his handsome face surged with a feeling of unwillingness that was impossible to conceal. Xianxia patted him on the shoulder and consoled with a smile. "It isn't like we're parting forever, and it's just temporary. Once you and Yuer cultivate to the heavenly immortal realm, we'll naturally be able to get together again." Chen nodded with force while he took a deep breath to calm himself. Qing Shui walked forward and stretched out her hand to rub Chen's head, and then she said calmly, "I'll be waiting for all of you in the immortal dimension. Don't slack off." "Don't worry, Mother. I'll come for sure. Qian's handsome face was suffused with a wisp of dense firmness. Xianxia nodded before she turned around to look at Qianxi. I'll come look for you once you've arrived at the immortal dimension. Her voice was still drifting through the air when she transformed into a wisp of extremely dazzling and resplendent light that charged swiftly into the sky. At this instant, even the heavens and the earth surged with wisps of golden divine radiance that illuminated the world. These scenes were too dazzling and resplendent, as if a golden ray of light had descended from the heavens and was protecting her. Moreover, waves of the roars of dragons and cries of phoenixes faintly resounded from within it, and it was ethereal and auspicious as it enveloped the surroundings. Is this Ascension? Qianxi, Qianyu, and Qianan raised their heads and stared blankly at the sky. On this day, Xianxia, that had experienced 100 reincarnations and eliminated the karma from her past lives, had torn through space while illuminated by gold light and auspicious tunes that descended from the sky, and she shook the world. On this day, the 10 saint emperors of the Xenorace made a sudden appearance while leading the Xenorace armies, and they started a war against the 10 great immortal sects and 6 lineages of the devil sections. The dark reverie was in complete chaos, but at this moment, there was still almost 900 years before the period of upheaval of the 3 dimensions that the great figures of the world had discovered. Is it going to break out beforehand? On this day, within some secluded places in the boundlessly vast dark reverie, numerous terrifying consciousness that seemed to be able to reach the sky surged out in unison, and they swept through the world before emitting the same exclaim of surprise. On this day, the 9 Radiant Sword sect was on full alert, and the sect guarding Grand Formation was activated while the 3 saints of 9 Radiants and some elders who lived in seclusion had walked out from their places of closed-door cultivation. It was also on this day that a young woman dressed up as a man had floated down to West Radiance Peak. Oh, these 2 little fellows are my martial nephews, huh? In the courtyard, Liang grinned as she sized Chenyu and Chenin up as soon as she arrived, and her starry eyes flowed with a wisp of fondness that wasn't concealed in the slightest. She casually withdrew 2 jade slips and tossed it over before she said, "Oh, this is Martial Ant's gift for the first time we've met. Keep in mind that you can't allow anyone else to see that." As she spoke, she couldn't refrain herself from walking forward and stretching out her hand to pinch both Chenyu and Qianan's faces, and her eyes sparkled brightly while they were filled with tender affection. Chenyu and Qianan were flabbergasted, and they were caught slightly off guard. They'd cultivated for almost 100 years, yet had their cheeks pinched like children, and this feeling caused them to feel very uncomfortable. She was stunned by Li Yang's sudden appearance as well. At this moment, when he saw Chenyu and Qianan's embarrassed and angry expressions from being teased, he couldn't help but laugh before he waved his hand to make the 2 little fellows leave. After the 2 of them left, Li Yang's expression returned to calm, and she sized Qianxi up from head to toe before she said, "Did you meet the 3rd Netherworld Emperor in the Netherworld?" Qianxi nodded. He was already accustomed to this senior sister of his since a long time ago, and he wasn't really surprised when she mentioned the 3rd Netherworld Emperor. That's an extraordinary existence. Li Yang sighed with emotion, and then her expression turned serious as she reminded. But you shouldn't comprehend the Terminus Tao insight for now. I understand. Qianxi smiled and suddenly noticed that a wisp of exhaustion that couldn't be concealed was faintly noticeable in the space between Li Yang's brows, and he couldn't help but ask with concern, "Senior sister, has something happened?" Li Yang chuckled. "Want to know?" She nodded. Li Yang raised her head while her starry eyes were misty and illusory, and she stared at the sky for a long time before she said, "A small calamity has erupted. From today onward, the curtains to the upheaval of the 3 dimensions will be drawn." As she spoke, she turned her head to look at Qianxi as she said, "Want me to take you to go experience the battles between some great figures of the 3 dimensions?" Qianxi was shocked while his eyes erupted with strands of bright light. How terrifying would the battles at that sort of level be? You have to be prepared. Some forces that shouldn't exist in the mortal dimension will be obliterated in this calamity, and no one can avoid it. After she spoke a sentence that was extremely secretive, Li Yang stretched out her hand and flipped it causing chilly starlight to drift out before she swiftly vanished with Xianxia on the spot. When Xianxia recovered his senses, he saw that he was suddenly standing on an ancient mountain peak that stood towering into the 9 heavens, and when he raised his eyes to look over, everything down to the slightest detail in the universe and starry sky could be seen. This mountain towered through the 9 heavens and arrived at the universe. As he stood at its peak, it was like he was outside the world and had entered into the boundless universe. Rivers of stars flowed while the sun and moon glowed, and it was an extremely vast and magnificent scene. She had never imagined that such a mountain would exist in the dark reverie. It towered into the sky like a pillar that held up the sky, and when he looked down from it, the ocean of clouds, clear sky, mountains, rivers, lakes, oceans, and the mortal world were all so tiny. It was like a picture had been unfolded in clear layers before his eyes, allowing him to arouse a feeling of superiority. This is Solitary Peak, and it's within the unknown lands. According to legend, it was formed by a piece of thick iron from the primeval times. Very few people have been able to ascend here since the ancient times, and I accidentally noticed records of this place from the books in our sect. Li Yang's clothes fluttered while her starry eyes were clear, and she said, "If we watch the battle from here, it would be enough to see everything." As she spoke, she sat casually on a rock and patted the area by her side to signal to Xianxia to sit down as well. The unknown land's Solitary Peak? As he sat down by Li Yang's side, Xianxia still couldn't help but be slightly shocked. In an instant, he'd actually arrived at the unknown lands that were the most mysterious in the dark reverie, and this sort of teleportation technique had completely exceeded his imagination. "Little senior sister, this calamity?" Before Xianxia could finish, Li Yang interrupted him with a light voice. "The calamity carries vast influence, so there's no need to speak about it any further because you wouldn't understand. You'll understand when those great figures fight each other." Xianxia was stunned, but didn't speak any further. He restrained his thoughts and looked towards the distance, and he faintly sensed that the sky above the entire dark reverie was suddenly suffused with a wisp of an indescribably and obscure fluctuation. It seemed like a terrifying force was circulating and brewing. This sort of fluctuation continued for 3 days, and it became more and more obscure as time passed, causing it to emanate an aura that caused the hearts of others to palpitate. This scene wasn't just noticed by Xianxia, it even alarmed numerous cultivators in the dark reverie. For a time, everyone was in a state of anxiety, and they felt that it seemed to wouldn't be long before a shocking change was about to begin. A calamity is coming. I never expected that this calamity would descend so quickly. No eggs can survive a broken nest. We can only fight. Within the dark reverie, no matter if it was those seniors that lived in seclusion or the forsakers of the heavens, so long as it was an existence whose strength had exceeded the scope of the mortal dimension, their expressions became extremely heavy at this moment. "Senior sister, my companions will be fine beneath this calamity, right?" On this day, Xianxia's heart jerked abruptly as he realized something. He had Li Yang by his side, so he naturally didn't have to worry about any danger, but what about Huamoliai, Lingbai, and the others? Them? Li Yang opened her eyes and shook her head. "Don't worry. This battle isn't something that just anyone can join in." Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this, and then he was shocked in his heart because he recalled what Li Yang had said earlier. Some forces that shouldn't exist in the mortal dimension will be obliterated in this calamity, and no one can avoid it. What does these words mean? Could it be? Before Xianxia could come to an understanding, a muffled thunderclap tumbled and resounded throughout the dark reverie. It was extremely violent, and it sounded like the heavens and the earth were being split apart once more, causing everyone in the world to tremble. After that, the sky and the entire dark reverie tore apart like silk, causing numerous twisted rifts to appear, and it seemed like the entire sky had shattered. At the same time, numerous bolts of lightning that were thick like arms surged out from the twisted rifts, and they illuminated and rumbled throughout the world as they enveloped the entire dark reverie. In practically an instant, the heavens and the earth were covered by a destructive and obscure fluctuation. At this moment, all the cultivators in the world raised their heads and looked towards the sky, and then their faces turned pale from shock while their souls trembled as they almost fell backwards to the ground. It wasn't just the sky that was on the verge of shattering. Even the energy of the laws of the heaven Tao that was circulating in the heavens and the earth was actually amidst collapse and destruction. My God! Is the end of the world coming? This. The sky is collapsing, and the heaven Tao is destroyed. Is a great calamity descending to the dark reverie. All the cultivators in the dark reverie were terrified and uneasy, and they cried out involuntarily or hid within their abodes while they executed various types of methods of self-protection. However, they seemed to have been taken by surprise and were in extreme panic. It's about to begin. Li Yang stood up abruptly and looked towards the distance, and her starry eyes glowed while they were suffused with a dreamlike and illusory sheen. At the same time, 3 dazzling figures charged out from the depths of the 9 radiant sword sect, and they were like gods as they charged into the sky. Shockingly, they were the 3 saints of 9 radiance, Feng Ting, Deng Chun, and Fei Ling. The 3 of them stood in midair and glanced at each other while revealing a wisp of resolution from their eyes. In the next moment, the 3 of them had vanished on the spot. Those damnable bastards are using the mortal dimension as their chessboard. How motherfucking disgusting. Heaven Trampler. Quickly come kill some bastards with Master. At the unknown lands and within a wooden house, an emaciated old man threw down the wooden blade in his hand while cursing with anger, and he smashed all the wooden bowls, wooden cups, wooden chairs, and wooden boxes on the ground before he shook his head and walked up step by step into the sky. Oh, we're going to kill some bastards. Is it finally coming? Hey, Master, wait. Little junior sister is still in closed-door cultivation. Hey, why re you leaving so quickly? The great sage, Heaven Trampler, roared loudly in a booming voice, and he transformed to a height that was equal to the sky before he smashed open the sky with a single punch and followed the emaciated old man to vanish in the sky. Order Yunlan to leave the sect once she completes her closed-door cultivation. At the first Heaven Devil sect, Fang Zhanmei that wore snow-white clothes instructed in an icy-cold voice before he raised his hand and tore space apart, and then he walked in with large strides. Bastards! I'm leaving, and I'll come back when I feel like it. At the Violet Thistle Mountains by Clan, Bai Jingqin slurped up a large bowl of noodles before he roared loudly, and then he kicked apart the space before him and left with a swagger. At this moment, numerous mighty figures appeared all over the dark reverie, and they charged into the sky. The Eternal Spirit Mountain, the Diana Forest Temple, the Saintly Land of Ascension, the Unknown Lands, the 10 great immortal sects, the 6 lineages of the Devil sects. It was even to the extent that numerous figures in the mortal world seemed to have noticed something, and they either shook their heads and sighed, or revealed resolute expressions, or muttered curses as they left. Rumble. In the sky above the dark reverie, the heaven Tao had shattered while time and space seemed to vanish as a horrifying black hole surged out into appearance, and then countless formidable life forms walked out endlessly from within the black hole. Amongst them were rock titans that were 30 m tall and possessed boundless strength, skeleton demons that held sickles, terrifying winged devils with 1,000 arms that shattered space. Life forms like these appeared without end. Those mighty figures from the dark reverie that charged into the sky quickly charged into the shattered sky and entered into a life and death battle with those terrifying and mysterious life forms. For a time, the entire sky was suffused with blazing light and surging battle intent. Moreover, a rain of light poured down as the shouts of battle shook the world. This is the calamity? Chun Shi was shocked while his entire body went cold. He was able to clearly sense that if he were to join in, then he would probably be instantly torn into shreds. This is only a small portion of it. Look, that's the battlefield of the true experts. Li Yang stretched her white and slender finger out and pointed towards a place even higher up in the sky. Chun Shi raised his head yet only saw an expanse of chaos that flickered with terrifying and shocking light that pierced his eyes to the point they hurt, and he was utterly incapable of seeing exactly what was occurring there. But in the next instant, he executed the Eye of Divine Truth, and he was able to clearly see that an even more terrifying and vast battlefield was above the boundless shattered sky. There were numerous formidable wills that caused the heavens and the earth to be cast into a shade there, and they swept out from the depths of space and rumbled as they collided without end. Every single collision devastated the sky, caused the sun and moon to go dim, and caused countless expanses of time and space to be obliterated in the surroundings. When he looked even further, he saw numerous large hands that seemed to have stretched out from the depths of the universe were in battle. They were either suffused with the aura of destruction, or vast like the ocean, or pure like the moon, or evil and soul-swallowing. Some hands even carried a variety of magic treasures that possessed the might to crush a world. And with a light grab of these hands, time and space were shattered and the sky was obliterated, causing it to be an extremely terrifying scene. This was a battle between great figures. Everything shattered as flesh and blood turned to ash, and the entire sky above the dark reverie had been swept into an extremely chaotic flow of space. Xianxia was even able to clearly see a finger that was filled with an ancient aura stretched out from the depths of space, and it stretched over the river of stars to arrive here before it pressed down lightly, causing all the nearby stars to be crushed into powder. But it was precisely such a finger that possessed the might to destroy a world that was slashed off by a light swing of an iron sword that was mottled with rust. At this instant, Xianxia felt his mind sway violently while his scalp went numb, and his entire body couldn't help but feel bone-piercing coldness because battles at this level were truly too terrifying. Every single move was capable of shattering the stars and blasting apart space and time. It was truly extremely difficult to imagine exactly what sort of cultivation would be needed to be able to exert such might. Xianxia took repeated deep breaths before he was able to slightly drive out the shock in his heart, and then numerous questions arose in his mind. Who are they? Why were they in intense battle here? For exactly what reason did they launch this calamity? This is only a small calamity, and only a small portion of the great figures in the 3 dimensions were deployed. The true chess players are hiding behind the scenes and watching coldly from the sidelines. Li Yang's cherry lips parted lightning as she spoke slowly, and she didn't conceal the ridicule in her voice at all. This is only a small calamity? Xianxia was dazed. Isn't this too astounding? I'm truly unable to imagine exactly how terrifying the scene of the true upheaval of the 3 dimensions will be. Junior brother, calm your heart and cultivate. The sooner you grow, the better. When the upheaval of the 3 dimensions arrives, no one can avoid getting involved in it. It was unknown what Li Yang had thought off, but she sighed faintly and seemed to be dejected. Xianxia was shocked in his heart, and then his expression became extremely firm as he said, Senior sister at that time, I'll surely share your burdens. Not me, but our Oracle Mountain. Moreover, I believe you'll be able to exceed my expectations. Li Yang raised her head and stared at Xianxia, and her starry eyes were gentle like water and carried a wisp of a gratified expression. After that, she moved her gaze and looked towards the distant battlefield, and then a wisp of an unfathomable grin appeared on the corners of her mouth as she said, Junior brother, the laws of the Heaven Tao have shattered now, and the great figures are busy with their own affairs. This is a great opportunity to gain benefits from this. Gain benefit? Xianxia was stunned. He gazed at the terrifying battle in the sky that seemed as if it was capable of annihilating the world, and he didn't dare imagine how he would obtain benefits under such circumstances. This was simply no different from pulling chestnuts out of the fire, and the slightest mistake would end in their death. Before Xianxia could recover from his shock, Li Yang had made a move. A translucent and large net soared into the sky and suddenly transformed into a ray of light that charged into the battlefield in the sky. The large net was crystalline, translucent, suffused with strands of chilly starlight that caused it to seem illusory, and was light as if it didn't exist. Moreover, it was suffused with an aura that enchanted the heart. But surprisingly, everywhere this net passed, those mighty figures and those terrifying and mysterious lifeforms that were fighting intensely without end on the battlefield didn't notice it at all, and they allowed the large net to pass through by their sides. Xianxia even saw a large hand that could blot out the sky stretch out from the depths of space, and it lay across the river of stars while its fingers were suffused with the profundities of the laws. It crushed time and space into pieces and directly passed through the large net. However, it seemed as if the hand had passed through a shadow while ripples arose from the large net before it recovered its former state and wasn't damaged in the slightest. On the other hand, The large hand revealed an imperceptible trace of stiffening briefly. Eh? A shocking divine voice reverberated from the depths of the universe, and it seemed as if the owner of the large hand had noticed something. However, in next to no time, he couldn't be bothered about all of this and attacked the enemy that stood before him with a flip of his hand. The large net continued to move towards the depths of space instead, and it was like a dreamlike and misty flowing light that didn't cause any changes in the surroundings. That's Chun. She stared blankly at the net. The overarching heaven net that's refined from starsoul sand and 5 colored rocks of chaos. It's one of the natural spirit treasures that Master left behind. As the saying goes, the net of the heavens has large meshes, but it lets nothing through. Before this treasure, even the ethereal and indistinct Tao insight, laws, and karma can be captured. Li Yang smiled lightly while the corners of her lips made a slight upward arc, and she was in high spirits. A natural spirit treasure. Overarching heaven net. It was the first time she had heard of a treasure with such a grade, and he couldn't help but feel a wave of shock when he thought of how this treasure could actually capture Tao insight, the laws, karma, and various other ethereal and indistinct. He didn't dare believe that the treasures in the world would actually possess such a miraculous effect. In merely a short moment, Li Yang's eyes lit up before she said with a smile, "The fish has entered the net. Little junior brother, quickly sit down cross-legged because this fish is a shattered piece of the laws of the heaven Tao." The laws of the heaven Tao. Chun, she was astounded. This senior sister of mine is truly too surprising. If he didn't agree to follow Li Yang here to witness the battle between the great figures of the 3 dimensions, he wouldn't believe that everything he'd seen and heard here were real. But at this moment, he didn't have the time to contemplate so much and hurriedly held his breath while calming his heart before he sat down cross-legged. And then he discarded the distracting thoughts in his mind before entering into meditation. Bang! Right when he just entered into a meditative state, he felt his entire body being bound by a blazing stream, and the energy in this stream was pure, vast, and coiled with the energy of a myriad of Tao insights and laws. It was like strong wine that was brewed from countless laws, and Tao insights had entered into his entire body through his pores, causing the tendons and bones in Xianxia's body to actually emit the roars of lions and dragons. They resounded wave after wave and stretched throughout his body to form ring after ring of the glow of the Grand Tao. After that, this indescribable and miraculous energy started to seep into his blood, meridians, internal organs. In an instant, it was like water droplets that had fallen into a wok of oil, and they exploded. The black hole world in Xianxia's dantian circulated madly, while a myriad of talisman markings seethed and were suffused with blazing and boundless light. In that instant, even the immortal energy in the surroundings started to circulate. At this moment, she seemed to have transformed into an ocean of talisman markings. Every single pore in his body surged with strands of the glow of the Tao, while immortal energy rumbled and circulated without end within his meridians, internal organs, apertures, and black hole world, as the indescribable aura of the Tao surged throughout his body as well. His body embodied Tao insight and merged into the world. His mind and body entered the Tao, and the Tao formed into talisman markings. Little junior brother really is extraordinary. He actually inscribed talisman markings on the meridians in his entire body and his black hole world, causing them to form the aura of the Tao. In this way, his body is internally illuminated by the flames of his vitality, while it externally reflects the circulation of the world. If he advances into the heavenly immortal realm, then he'll probably be able to condense the energy of the laws in an extremely short period of time. The nearby Li Yang's face was slightly pale while the exhaustion on her face was difficult to conceal. But the gaze she shot at Chun, she carried a wisp of delight and gratification instead. This fragment of the heaven Tao was the supreme energy of order that maintained a world. It represented the might of the heavens, and it was extremely emotionless and supreme. The Tao insight and energy of the laws that was comprehended by the myriad of living beings in the world came from within the heaven Tao. Presently, Li Yang had seized the opportunity of the eruption of this calamity, and the moment the heaven Tao collapsed and shattered to capture a fragment of the shattered heaven Tao with the overarching heaven net for Xianxia while disregarding the consumption of her strength that it caused. This obviously showed how terrifying the strength contained within the fragment of the Heaven Tao was. It was even not exaggerated to say that a fragment of the Heaven Tao like this was a priceless and precious treasure that immortals dreamt of in the immortal dimension. Time gradually flowed by. Under this energy of the Heaven Tao that surged like an ocean, Xianxia's vital energy and immortal energy attained the highest peak within the earthly immortal realm, and it was a full and flawless state. Merely in terms of the denseness of his immortal energy, it was even over 100 times denser than ordinary earthly immortals. At the same time, his grasp towards the various Tao insights had obtained an obvious increase. For example, the Tao insights like the 5 elements yin, yang, wind, lightning, star, paramitha, oblivion, and so on and so forth had attained perfection a long time ago. Now, they'd started to condense and faintly showed signs of transforming into divine chains of the laws. On the other hand, grand Tao profundities like obliteration, eternal, devour, creation, judgment, and so on and so forth that hadn't attained perfection, they were improving swiftly at a tremendous pace. If this scene were to be seen by others, they would probably be shocked unconscious by it. This was the might of a fragment of the Heaven Tao. It represented the might of the heavens and supreme order. It circulated within the 3,000 worlds of the mortal dimension, so how could the might contained within it be ordinary? Of course, its ability to attain such extraordinary effect couldn't do without the thick foundation that Xianxia possessed. If he hadn't attained the extreme realm of the earthly immortal realm and hadn't grasped over 10 types of grand Tao profundities, then it would be impossible for him to completely release the might of the fragment of the Heaven Tao. Take Tao insights, for example. If it was a cultivator that hadn't grasped any Tao insights, then even if he was given 10 Heaven Tao fragments, it would be utterly impossible for him to grasp the various profundities contained within it. This was like the relationship between seeds and the rain. Xianxia had already planted various seeds, and this Heaven Tao fragment had transformed into rain that caused the seeds to sprout and grow. Without seeds, then no matter how much rain there was, it was useless. After an unknown period of time, Xianxia opened his eyes from his meditation. His gaze was calm and even more immense, and then divine lights surged into appearance before they transformed into various miraculous diagrams that flashed in his eyes before vanishing. My tribulation is descending in 49 days. At this instant, Xianxia had a natural strand of comprehension, and he sensed that moment of opportunity to advance into the 9th level of the earthly immortal realm and ascend into the immortal dimension. When he recalled everything he'd experienced all along the way here and thought of how he was about to ascend into the immortal dimension, all the emotions in his heart transformed into calmness in the end. He knew that this day would arrive. Just like he firmly believed that he would be able to attain any desire so long as he was alive. Because he'd never questioned or wondered about it in the past, he seemed to be extremely calm and composed at this moment. Congratulations, little junior brother. With your accumulation, no one would dare look down upon you once you arrive at the immortal dimension. The nearby Liang chuckled as she sized Xianxia up, and then she revealed a charming smile. Xianxia stood up and cupped his hands as he said, "I have to thank senior sister for helping me achieve all of this." He was very clearly aware that if he didn't possess this Heaven Tao fragment, then he would probably have to enter into closed-door cultivation for a very long period of time to comprehend the opportune moment to advance into the 9th level of the earthly immortal realm. All right, the curtains to the calamity have already been drawn, and I should leave as well. Liang smiled as she spoke in a light voice. The curtains to the calamity have already been drawn. Xianxia was stunned, and then he looked up into the sky. He saw that the sky that was torn apart like silk, the vast battlefield where the great figures fought violently, and the terrifying fluctuations that filled the world and possessed an destructive aura, all of the chaos and slaughter had vanished completely without him noticing it. At this moment, the sky was clear while the energy of the Heaven Tao circulated within it, and everything had recovered to a calm state as it was before. It ended just like that? Xianxia recalled the shocking scenes from before, and he was still extremely dazed. They've already fought for 7 days, and those who should die have already perished, whereas those that didn't have been drawn up into the immortal dimension. All in all, those old fellows from the 3 dimensions that pulled the strings from behind the scenes can be considered to have obtained a small victory during this battle. That wisp of familiar ridicule appeared once more on the corners of Li Yang's mouth. But in the end, a portion of people have to be sacrificed in a match, and exactly who'll be able to remain laughing until the end can only be known after the true upheaval of the three dimensions arrives. Xianxia was unable to understand all of this for now, but he believed that once the upheaval of the three dimensions arrived, then he would surely be able to understand the cause and effect of everything. Because it was just as Li Yang had said, at that time, no one could avoid getting involved in it. After that, Li Yang didn't stay any longer, and she brought Xianxia along to swiftly vanish on Solitary Peak. The Nine Radiance Sword Sect. The atmosphere was gloomy, and regardless of elder or disciple, everyone had sorrowful expressions. When Xianxia returned, he found out that the three saints of Nine Radiance, Fengting, Fei Ling, and Deng Chun had fallen during the calamity. This was undoubtedly an extremely heavy blow to the Nine Radiance Sword Sect. Actually, it wasn't just the Nine Radiance Sword Sect. No matter if it was Forsakers of the Heavens or those seniors that lived in seclusion, all the existences in the entire dark reverie that were at the 9th level of the earthly immortal realm or above had been affected by this calamity. Some perished during the calamity, and there were some that were fortunate enough to survive. But they were drawn into the immortal dimension and were unable to return to the mortal dimension any longer. Perhaps this was one of the reasons that such a calamity occurred. It was for the sake of utilizing the might of the calamity to completely wipe out all forces that exceeded the scope of the mortal dimension. Xianxia couldn't refrain from having this thought, and his feelings were slightly heavy. After that, he shook his head and stopped thinking about it. All of this was too far away from him. So even if this calamity was a scheme that was meticulously set up by someone a long time ago, what about it? When one's strength was insufficient, one could only be passively reduced to a chess piece. I wonder where, in the immortal dimension, is the Tao Emperor Academy. She suddenly recalled Li Yang's instructions before she left, and he couldn't help but feel a trace of anticipation. Tao Emperor Academy. Before she left, this was one of the places that Li Yang told Xianxia he could go to after he ascended into the immortal dimension, and so long as he joined the academy, the Wuxia clan would be unable to do anything to him even if they possessed boundless strength. On the other hand, since it was capable of filling the Wuxia clan with fear, it obviously showed how formidable the Tao Emperor Academy was. At the very least, it wasn't inferior to the Wuxia clan. This was only Xianxia's understanding of the Tao Emperor Academy. As for exactly how formidable it was, he would perhaps only be able to obtain a complete understanding once he arrived at the immortal dimension. West Radiance Peak. When they saw Xianxia who'd vanished for 7 days returning safely, Huamoliai and the others heaved long sighs of relief. During these past few days, they were indeed worried that Xianxia had been swept into that calamity as well. Xianxia smiled lightly when he saw this, and he didn't explain anything but sighed in his heart instead. The final level of the heavenly tribulation will be descending in 49 days. What would eldest senior brother and the others do if I ascend into the immortal dimension? How should I find a place for Ling Bai, Mortis, Amon Bai Kue, Mu Kue, and the others? After all, I don't know when I'll be able to return to the mortal dimension after I leave this time. Once a mishap occurs, I wouldn't even have the chance to feel regret. As for bringing them along as I ascend into the immortal dimension, that's even more impossible. Even if I place them within the manor, they will be noticed by the immortal dimension's laws, and if that were to occur, will absolutely be taken to be offenders and annihilated. After thinking about it for a long time, Xianxia was unable to come up with anything in the end, and he could only put this matter down for now. My lord, I'll be leaving first. Not long after Xianxia returned, Qiu Yunsheng came looking for him, and Qiu Yunsheng engaged in some small talk before making the reason for his arrival clear. Since Qiu Yunsheng was subdued by Qing Shui with a secret technique, this mysterious immortal realm expert seemed to have become a different person when he was before Xianxia. He was respectful, reverent, and didn't reveal the slightest arrogance, and he behaved extremely obediently. Oh, you're leaving? Xianxia was surprised. He didn't believe that this fellow was so respectful and submissive in his heart. My time limit in the mortal dimension is up, and if I still don't return, then I'll be detained by the energy of the immortal dimension and taken back as a criminal. Zhou Yunxing explained patiently. But don't worry. After I return to the misty immortal mountain this time, I'll help you gather information relating to the enemies of the 9 Radiant Sword Sect and the Wuxia clan. I'll surely not let you down. Xianxia glanced at him with a spurious smile and said, It looks to me like you're anxious to return to your sect, so that you can ask those great figures to help you deal with the restrictions within your body. Right? Zhou Yunxing's figure stiffened, and then he said with an indignant expression, My lord, your words truly cast a chill over my heart. The sun and moon can be witnesses to my loyalty, and I'll absolutely not do anything that betrays you. Xianxia glanced at him with disdain, and he couldn't be bothered to expose Zhou Yunxing's thoughts. Xianxia waved his hand and said, All right, you can go. I'll naturally contact you after I arrive at the immortal dimension. My lord, take care of yourself. Zhou Yunxing cupped his hands before he turned around and left with large strides. This fellow is full of tricks, and 9 out of 10 things he says are false. But if he can be of use to me, then I'll be able to save myself from a lot of trouble. Xianxia watched the rays of light that Zhou Yunxing transformed into vanish, and a wisp of deep contemplation flashed in his eyes. After a short period of time, Xianxia returned to the banks of the sword purification pool and entered into meditative cultivation. Watching the shocking battle during the calamity this time stimulated Xianxia greatly. Especially after he obtained the Heaven Dao fragment, it caused his cultivation, vital energy, and even comprehensions of Dao insights to attain a flawless state. For example, the eternal, creation, obliteration, devour, judgment, and various other rare grand Dao profundities had attained perfection. It could be said that Xianxia had already arrived at the end of the earthly immortal realm now, and unless he advanced in cultivation, he would be unable to improve in the slightest no matter how hard he cultivated. It was even not exaggerated to say that after the calamity, Xianxia was the worthy number 1 expert in the entire mortal dimension, because forsakes of the heavens didn't exist in the world any longer, whereas those seniors that lived in seclusion had either perished along with the calamity or ascended into the immortal dimension. Unfortunately, the number 1 expert in the mortal dimension is only limited to the mortal dimension in the end, and it isn't the immortal dimension. After a long time, Xianxia woke up from his meditation, and he felt slightly impatient to head to the immortal dimension. The first Heaven Devil Sex Fan Yunlan has come to pay a visit. May I know if Elder Xianxia is here? Right at this moment, an airy voice that carried a trace of unique magnetism suddenly resounded outside West Radiance Peak, and it slowly spread throughout the heavens and the earth. Xianxia's entire body shook while the image of an extraordinarily delicate and charming woman with fiery red hair and snow-white skin appeared in his mind. Fan Yunlan, why has she come? He recalled that all those years ago in the primeval battlefield, Fan Yunlan had been taken as a disciple by the first Heaven Devil Sex Fang Zhanmei, and since that day, he hadn't heard anything about her. Now that he considered the time, it had already been over 100 years. Originally, Xianxia felt slightly regretful that he was about to ascend into the immortal dimension yet was unable to meet all his old friends. Never had he imagined that Fan Yunlan would actually come to the West Radiance Peak herself. This was a pleasant surprise. But before he could make any reaction, numerous voices sounded out once more from outside West Radiance Peak. The first Heaven Devil Sex Zhao Qinghe has come to pay a visit to Elder Xianxia. The saintly land of Ascension's Huangfu Qingying, the saintly land of Ascension's young Master Zhou, the unknown land's Zhenlu Qing, Tihe Diana Forest Temple's Ling Yu. At this moment, Xianxia almost felt there was something wrong with his ears, but his figure had flashed and vanished from his room a long time ago. In the sky above West Radiance Peak, a group of men and women stood there. The men were handsome and the women were beautiful, and all of them possessed various bearings and were like phoenixes and dragons amongst men. It was obvious with a single glance that they weren't ordinary figures. Hey! Do you think that bastard Xianxia will go mad with happiness when he knows we've come? Young Master Zhou leaned lazily on Ling Yu as he asked with a grin. I think he'll go insane, said Ling Yu in a serious manner. Ling Yu had shaved himself bald, and he revealed a solemn and dignified appearance. I agree with the little baldy's views. The nearby Huangfu Qingying grinned as she spoke, and she even stretched out her hand to rub Ling Yu's shiny head while she revealed a curious expression. Zhao Qinghe didn't speak and just listened silently. However, his appearance that was like 10,000-year-old ice had obviously become much gentler, and his chilly lips curved into an arc and were suffused with a wisp of a smile. This was similarly the first time they'd met since entering the dark reverie. So when he saw everyone was fine and were the same as before, he felt rather happy. Zhen Luqing wore a green dress that was simple and elegant while she seemed beautiful and extraordinary. She glanced at the nearby Fan Yunlan and said casually, "I heard Qing Shui has left." "Yes." Fang Yunlan only nodded while her beautiful eyes stared blankly at the West Radiance peak, and she seemed to be searching for the traces Chun she had left behind on it. Just like in the past, she still liked to wear red clothes, and it was like flames as it vividly drew out her graceful and slender figures. Coupled with her extremely delicate and drop-dead gorgeous appearance, it caused everyone to be astounded by the sight of her. If Zhen Luqing was a plain and beautiful lotus, then Fan Yunlan was a delicate and charming rose. Each of them held their own advantages. Zhen Luqing couldn't help but pucker her lips when she saw Fan Yunlan's reaction, and then she started laughing before she sighed faintly. After so many years have passed, I wonder how many more women are by his side. He has never been someone that took the initiative. Fan Yunlan seemed to have thought of something from the past, and her delicate and charming face was suffused with a smile of understanding. Why isn't he a person that takes the initiative? Young Master Zhou moved forward and said dirtily, "If he wasn't someone that took the initiative, then would he be able to make both of you speak without end like resentful women as soon as both of you met?" "Fuck off!" Both of them berated in unison. Young Master Zhou instantly fled with his hands covering his head, and he ran over to Huangfu Qingying's side before he said with a helpless expression, "Alas, that bastard Chun, she is clearly not as handsome as me, nor does he look domineering as me, but why is there just so many people that like him?" Huangfu Qingying glanced at him and directly said to Fan Yunlan and Zhen Luqing, "Big sisters, this fellow said both of you have eyes but fail to see. Do you want to beat him up?" Swoosh! Two cold gazes swept over, causing young Master Zhou's entire body to tremble, and he glared with rage and sorrow at Huangfu Qingying, as if he felt deeply grieved that even Huangfu Qingying had betrayed him. This scene caused Ling Yu and Zhao Qinghe to burst into laughter. She saw this sort of scene as soon as he arrived, causing a myriad of thoughts to flood his mind while the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a wisp of a smile. It was always a pleasure to greet friends that had come from afar. West Radiance Peak was extraordinarily bustling on the same day that everyone arrived. Jug after jug of fine wine was served endlessly like flowing water. At the end, it became a battlefield of wine between the four men, Chan Shi, young Master Zhou, Ling Yu, and Zhao Qinghe. They drank with delight as if they'd returned to the past. Of course, no one utilized their cultivation, otherwise it would be no different from cheating. On the other hand, Fan Yunlan and Zhen Luqing looked at Chanen with complicated expressions, causing the little fellow to feel as if he was sitting on a bed of thorns. In the end, he was truly unable to refrain himself from fleeing. Unfortunately, Qing Shui benefited from all those years ago. Fan Yunlan sighed faintly. Zhen Luqing didn't understand what Fan Yunlan said, but she felt slightly sour in her heart as well. However, she said with a smile instead, "I'm saying if you and Chan Shi have a child, what would you name it?" Fan Yunlan was stunned while her beautiful face heated up because this question was truly too direct. But in next to no time, she raised her chest and contemplated seriously before she said, "Chun Ping. Chun Ping." Zhen Luqing couldn't help but burst into laughter that was pleasant to the ear and sounded like a gurgling stream. She finally understood that Fan Yunlan had always been unwilling to lose to Qing Shui. One was called Chun and the other was called Chun Ping. It was only a name, yet she wanted to differentiate the order between them. Since she bothered about this sort of minor details, it obviously showed how unwilling Fan Yunlan was to lose to Qing Shui. "What about you?" asked Fan Yunlan abruptly. "Me?" Zhen Liuqing's laughter stopped abruptly as she seemed to have never expected that Fan Yunlan would ask her this question, and she was instantly stunned on the spot and was unable to answer it for a long time. Looks like you're just like me, but you're unable to think of a better name. Fan Yunlan spoke complacently and revealed a triumphant appearance. I'll listen to Chen Shi's decision. Zhen Liuqing's clear eyes glistened with wavy light, and she held her chin as she stared at Chen Shi. The child will be named any name he likes. Both of you aren't even together with Chen Shi yet, but you've already started to giving birth to children for him and naming them? Meanwhile, young Master Zhou had appeared out of nowhere, and he glanced at Fan Yunlan and Zhen Liuqing before he looked up to the night sky with a sorrowful expression and sighed with emotion. This is unfair. Could it be that it's because I'm too handsome to the point no one dares to arouse any desires towards me? Alas, being so handsome isn't my fault. This is really unfair. 49 days later. Dawn. Within the 9 Radiance Sword sect. As if they'd come to some sort of tacit understanding, regardless of disciple or elder, all of them stopped what they were doing and walked out of their rooms before looking towards West Radiance Peak from afar. Today was the day that Chen Shi would overcome the tribulation and ascend. On West Radiance Peak, Chen Shi bid his farewells to Huamoliai and the others. His bearing was calm and composed, and there was a smile on the corners of his mouth. He didn't reveal any anxiousness or unwillingness, because he'd already said all that had to be said. So besides letting fate have its way, what else could he do? The only thing that caused Chen Shi to be slightly regretful was that he didn't have the time to return to the Darchu dynasty and bid temporary farewells to his younger brother, Chen Hao, and all those other old friends of his. But he was already extremely content. At least his son, nephew, Huamoliai, Fan Yunlan, Zhen Liuqing, and all the others were here. Moreover, he'd made arrangements for Ling Bai, Bai Kue, Amon, Mortis, Mu Kue, Shuyan, and the others. Zhen Liuqing would take them to the Immortal Dimension through a secret realm in the unknown lands 10 years from now. The secret realm was a place that Zhen Liuqing's master, Taoist Dao Ke, had personally prepared for her, and ascending from there would allow one to directly arrive at a mysterious area in the Immortal Dimension, the divine abyss of darkness. According to Zhen Liuqing, Ling Bai and the others only had to follow by her side when the time came, and they would be able to safely arrive at the Immortal Dimension without worry of any mishaps occurring. Even though Chen Shi was surprised by this, it had dealt with the burden in his heart in the end. So even if he didn't understand it, he felt much more relaxed in his heart. Truthfully speaking, besides Mu Kue and Shuyan, Ling Bai, Bai Kue, Amon, and Mortis were abnormal freaks. One of them was a sword soul that had cultivated, the other was an auspicious beast Pishio, the other was a soul combat puppet of mysterious origin. If these abnormal freaks wanted to ascend into the Immortal Dimension, then he didn't know how long it would take and what sort of setbacks they would encounter. Now that there was Zhen Liuqing to help bring them to the Immortal Dimension, Chen Shi was naturally delighted to the extreme. Father! The nearby Chen and couldn't help but call out in a low voice. Chen Shi rubbed the little fellow's head and said in a low voice, "Remember to go back and visit your uncle and aunt if you have the chance. They've done too much for our Chen clan, and there are some things that you have to help with." Chunin nodded and said with a firm expression, "Don't worry, father. Uncle, just you wait. I'll come to the Immortal Dimension to look for you soon." Chun Yu was filled with lofty sentiments as he spoke resolutely. Chen Shi roared with laughter. All right. During these past few days, he'd already compiled parts of his knowledge and passed it down to the two little fellows. It didn't just contain supreme techniques like the All-Heaven Truth and Eternal Tao Scripture. There was even experiences and techniques related to combat. Moreover, before he headed to the Immortal Dimension this time, besides the Saint's Laughter Forbidden Sword, Tao Calamity Sword, and other such similar treasures, he'd passed all the other treasures in the Buddha's pagoda to Chen Yu and Chen En. He did this because he hoped that these two little fellows would quickly become strong, so as to help ease the burden on Chen Hao and make contributions to the Chen clan. Of course, his disciple Chen Yen got a portion of it as well. Don't slack off. Chen Shi looked at Chen Yen. As he gazed at this dark, simple, and determined young man, he said in a light voice, "If you encounter any questions, then you can discuss it with Chen and Chen Yu or ask the other seniors of the sect." Actually, Chen Shi always felt that he owed Chen Yen slightly. After all, after he brought Chen Yen into the sect, there were very few moments where he, the master, would impart any knowledge to Chen Yen. Now that he was about to leave, this was all that he could do. "Don't worry, master. I'll surely work even harder." Qin Yan spoke firmly. He was still the same as before and extremely treasured everything he possessed now. Thus, he cultivated even more painstakingly, as he'd already taken Chen Shi to be like a father to him in his heart. But he'd never express himself and carefully concealed these feelings in the depths of his heart. "Don't worry, uncle, junior brother Chen Yan will definitely not suffer any grievances with me here." Chen Yu put his arm around Chen Yan's shoulder as he patted his chest and guaranteed to take everything on. During this period of time on West Radiance Peak, he'd become familiar with Chen Yan since a long time ago, and coupled with their relationships with Chen Shi, both of them were already like brothers. At this point, Chen Shi grinned slightly and stopped talking while he looked up at the sky. Unknowingly, the sky was already pitch black. Dark black clouds flooded the sky and gathered together as they surged without end, and they emanated a horrifying aura. The heavens and the earth were covered in an expanse of oppressive pressure. Bang! A thunderclap resounded through the 9 heavens and broke the silence in the heavens and the earth. Accompanying this thunderclap was numerous bolts of lightning that were thick like the arms of an infant and blazing like silver serpents. They converged together and transformed into a lightning vortex that hung in the sky while circulating madly, and it emanated an aura that seemed to desire to obliterate the world. This was the 9th level of the heavenly tribulation of earthly immortals, the Ascension lightning tribulation. But unlike the tribulation of other earthly immortals, the Ascension lightning tribulation Chen Shi faced was even more terrifying. The arcs of lightning flowed with dense and mysterious energy of the laws, and they were suffused with a dazzling and resplendent glow that illuminated the world. It was even to the extent that numerous images of gods, immortal palaces, immortal mountains, a variety of phenomena were formed within it. Myriad phenomena of ascension, immortal energy filling the sky. My God! This is the most terrifying type of phenomenon amongst ascension lightning tribulations. According to legend, this sort of phenomenon only forms when innate saints and matchless fiend gods faced their tribulations. How many years has it been? I never expected that it would actually appear once more. When they saw such a terrifying tribulation, no matter how confident they were towards Chen Shi, everyone in the 9 Radiant Sword sect couldn't help but feel anxious. Swoosh! Right at this moment, a golden ray of light soared into the sky. Chen Shi had a calm expression. His hair fluttered in the air while his gaze was deep like the starry sky, and his eye reflected the variations in all things as he moved up step by step into the sky. Every single step he took formed a golden lotus that was suffused the radiance of enormous virtue, and there was actually strands of the sound of the chanting of the Grand Tao resounding from it. It cleansed the soul and caused the heavens and the earth to be dyed in a layer of golden radiance. At this instant, the anxiousness that coiled around the hearts of all vanished for no reason or rhyme, and their hearts became calm and tranquil. After that, they saw a scene that was bound to be impossible to forget in their entire lifetimes. Chen Shi stood in midair beneath the surging tribulation lightning in the sky, and his figure was lone and suffused with a myriad of strands of golden radiance. Yet he seemed to disregard everything as if they didn't exist as he formed a sword with his fingers and slashed down lightly. The clouds broke into pieces. The lightning was obliterated. In an instant, there wasn't a single strand of tribulation clouds within an area of 50,000 kilometers in the sky, nor was there a strand of tribulation lightning. Everything had undergone a tremendous change amidst that casual slash with his fingers. It was like the world had changed in an instant, and ages had passed in the blink of an eye. Everyone felt slightly suffocated while their entire bodies stiffened, and they were stunned on the spot. All of them slightly didn't dare believe it and almost thought they were seeing things. This was the 9th level of the heavenly tribulation that revealed a myriad of phenomena of ascension and immortal energy that filled the sky. The might of the heavens that it represented had annihilated countless shocking and extraordinary figures since the ancient times, and it was extremely terrifying. Yet now it was actually shattered by a single strike of Chen Shi before it even descended. This fellow has already attained a state of perfection in the earthly immortal realm, and his accumulation is so formidable that it's sufficient to look down proudly everyone in the entire world since the ancient times until now. Zhen Luqing muttered while her eyes that were clear as water were suffused with ripples of extraordinary splendor. I really wonder how he cultivated all these years. The nearby Fan Yunlan couldn't help but sigh lightly as well, and she felt that it was utterly impossible for her to catch up to his footsteps no matter how she tried. Zhao Qinghe, young Master Zhou, Huangfu Qingying, Ling Yu, and the others felt sad for themselves as well. For example, all of them had been cultivating in meditation all through these years in the secluded paradises and possessed the guidance of seniors in their sects who possessed extraordinary attainments in cultivation. They originally thought that when they emerged into the world this time, even if they were unable to surpass Xianxia, they would at least not fall behind. But never had they imagined that this fellow was still standing in front of them. Moreover, based on how easily he overcame the tribulation, he was far from being someone they could compare to. This is Xianxia. He exceeds the expectations of everyone every single time, and he's truly different from the rest. Compared to him, all the geniuses in this world can only seem like ordinary people. Ha ha ha! When Huiting roared with laughter, and his voice revealed boundless emotion and happiness. Were these words of his exaggerated? Not in the slightest. At least, Xianxia was like a miracle that could never fade from the hearts of everyone in the 9 Radiant Sword sect, and the matters related to him absolutely carried the color of legends. Could anyone deny this after carefully thinking about all the incidents related to him during these past few years? After the tribulation lightning was obliterated, strands of golden rays of divine radiance started to from in the sky. They tore through the sky and lay across the heavens and the earth while emanated divine radiance, and they were suffused with immortal brilliance that dyed the entire heavens and earth in a divine and gorgeous glow. It was immortal brilliance that came from the immortal dimension, and every single strand was magnificent, gorgeous, and didn't belong to the mortal dimension. At this moment, when they saw this scene, all the living beings in an area of 500,000 kilometers were filled with shock, admiration, and reverence. Amidst this silent and solemn atmosphere, Xianxia turned around with a clear and dense gaze in his eyes as he cupped his hands towards everyone in the 9 Radiant Sword sect from afar, and then he turned around elegantly before he walked off. Every single step he took caused immortal brilliance to arise beneath his feet. Immortal brilliance arose with every step as he rose into the sky. This was the scene of ascending while being held up by brilliant light. The immortal brilliance was paying its respects and greeting an immortal into the dimension. In the end, everyone could only see expanses of magnificent and beautiful immortal brilliance coiled around Xianxia, causing him to seem like a god as he walked towards the most blazing expanse of immortal brilliance in the sky. Ascension. At this moment, everyone was speechless, and their gazes were filled with their well wishes to Xianxia. On this day, the master of the 9 Radiant Sword sect's West Radiance Peak, Xianxia, had overcome the 9th level of the heavenly tribulation and ascended into the immortal dimension. This piece of news spread throughout the entire dark reverie like a hurricane and at an unbelievable speed. It caused all the cultivators in the world to be shocked, and it even became a legend that could never be surpassed. Moreover, the various miracles he created in the mortal dimension became things that were impossible for others to surpass, and the future generations took delight in talking about it. Perhaps after countless years passed, the people of the world would finally forget it. But at the very least, at this moment, Xianxia's name, information, and everything related to him had left a thick and heavy stroke in the boundless history of the dark reverie, and it had become a mark that was remembered by all. Countless people were advancing courageously on the boundless path of immortality. All of this wasn't an end but a new journey, and the immortal dimension that stood proudly above the 9 heavens was the true stage for experts to fight for supremacy. Xianxia was already on his way there. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Only the sharp howls of the wind sounded out by his ears, and Xianxia was entirely unable to control his body. His eyes and immortal perception were unable to sense anything, and only his instincts were telling him that he seemed to be moving through layer after layer of spatial barriers and dimensional walls as he ascended. Moreover, the higher he ascended, the more the temporal laws in the surroundings surged. They were like a torrent that ceaselessly washed through his body, causing his body and soul to undergo marvelous transformations over and over again. His immortal perception transformed into immortal sense, and it surged within his sea of consciousness that was behind the center of the space between his brows. His immortal energy transformed into immortal force, and it whistled through his entire body. Even his skin, bones, tendons, blood, vital energy, and even the hair on his body were undergoing a swift transformation. This was Ascension. It was a type of transformation of one's essence. So long as one succeeded, one would be able to be ranked amongst heavenly immortals and lived alongside the ages. But this sort of transformation consumed an extreme amount of strength. The amount of immortal energy in Xianxia's black hole worlds was extremely enormous, yet during this process it was being consumed rapidly, and even the dark parasol sapling was unable to keep up with this sort of consumption. Bang! Sharp pain surged into the depths of his soul, causing Xianxia to instantly go pale. Before he ascended, he'd found out that his body, soul, and immortal energy at the earthly immortal realm would transform during the process of ascension, and completely transform into the foundation of a heavenly immortal. But he'd overlooked something, and that was that the strength of his body, soul, and immortal energy was too enormous while his foundation was extremely solid. It was at least over 100 times greater than an ordinary expert at the 9th level of the earthly immortal realm. So, it was similarly over 100 times more difficult for him to transform completely when compared with an ordinary earthly immortal. This was one of the disadvantages of having a foundation that was too deep. Even though he possessed a status of absolute supremacy amongst those of the same cultivation, it was similarly even more difficult for him to advance in cultivation when compared with others. Moreover, it was even more painful than others. Just like this moment. He felt as if his entire body was being devoured by a myriad of ants and numerous dull knives were slicing his body, and this sharp pain that came from the depths of his soul caused his entire body to tremble. Finally, he fell completely unconscious after an enormous bang resounded. After an unknown period of time, when Xianxia regained consciousness, he felt his entire body was immersed in a pool of water, and it was wet, uncomfortable, and even suffocating. Swish! In the next moment, he felt he was carried up and thrown onto the ground with a thump. At the same time, a voice of ridicule sounded by his ears. He actually fainted within the immortal transformation pool. This natural endowment of his is truly terrible. I wonder how he ascended here. Alas, each generation is worse than the previous. For the sake of pursuing advancements in their cultivation, the cultivators in the mortal dimension blindly swallow spirit pills and medicine, so they seem to have advanced, yet their foundations are extremely fragile like a lead spearhead that looks like silver. Pleasant to the eye but useless in reality. Another aged voice sounded out and sighed with emotion. A wave of roaring laughter filled the area when these words were spoken. Immortal transformation pool? So, I really have arrived at the immortal dimension. Xianxia felt completely at ease in his heart when he heard these words, and he paid no attention to the noise by his ears as he opened his eyes. Before his eyes was an extremely brilliant and scorching sun that hung high above the boundlessly distant sky. The sun sparkled and flowed with golden light, and it was extremely vast. Within the sun were some flame spirits, sun crows, and flaming birds that were formed and accumulated in it, and it was an extremely miraculous and extraordinary sight that was completely different to the mortal dimension. Xianxia's eyes narrowed as he stood up, and only now did he notice that the place he stood in was a vast and spacious hall, and a plaque that had Ascension Hall written on it hung on the hall's entrance. There was a pool that was shrouded with a fog immortal force outside the hall, and it emanated rays of light. At the side of the pool was a jade table, and behind the table was an old man and a thin and tall middle-aged man. Nearby where Xianxia stood was another 10+ figures, both men and women, young and old. At this moment, the gazes they shot at him were filled with ridicule. Xianxia didn't pay attention to all of this, and he just curiously sized up the surroundings. According to rumor, the immortal dimension was boundlessly vast, and its sky was even divided into 33 levels. These skies were filled with paradises that ancient sects and great figures of the immortal dimension resided in. On the other hand, ascension halls and immortal transformation pools were distributed within every single territory of the immortal dimension. They were controlled by immortal monarchs, and they were in charge of the matters of receiving and recruiting those that had ascended. It was precisely because of this that Xianxia was unable to determine exactly where in the immortal dimension he was. But the immortal force here was extremely abundant. Xianxia breathed lightly and was able to sense that the air here was suffused with pure yang immortal force that surged towards him, and it seemed as if the entire world was enveloped by boundless immortal force. But when he intended to utilize his immortal sense to sense the energy of the laws in the immortal dimension, he bitterly noticed that no matter if it was his sea of consciousness or body, they were completely empty, so he was utterly unable to sense anything. Fortunately, he was relieved to find that the scale of his sea of consciousness had widened by more than 10 times, and even the scale of his black hole world had become extremely vast, compared to before they'd undergone a qualitative transformation. All in all, Xianxia was a heavenly immortal now. But his strength was temporarily in an empty state that was in urgent need of replenishment. At that time, he would be able to have a deeper understanding of this completely new cultivation realm. Elder Wang, you can begin. Meanwhile, the old man behind the jade table opened his eyes and spoke slowly. All right. The thin middle-aged man's gaze was sharp like a hawk, and it swept past Xianxia and the others before he said indifferently, "Now, all of you step over one by one and claim your immortal tokens." Xianxia was clearly aware that immortal tokens were actually a form of proof of identity, and it wasn't of any other use. Its only use was perhaps that once one possessed an immortal token, then no matter if one entered a sect or power of the immortal dimension, then it could be utilized as proof of one's identity. The middle-aged man's voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when a thin young man instantly charged over to stand before the table and said in a respectful voice, "I'm from the Azurewood world, the Enlightenment Chi Sect's Wang Lin. Senior, please grant me an immortal token." The Enlightenment Chi Sect? The thin middle-aged man thought for a moment and confirmed that he hadn't heard the name of this sect before he took out an empty immortal token and drew on it briefly, and then he passed it over. 1,000 immortal stones. Wang Lin was stunned and then said with great difficulty, "Senior, the storage magic treasure this junior brought along was damaged during my ascension. I'm truly unable." Before he could finish speaking, the middle-aged man's face sank before he flicked his sleeve and said, "Then why didn't you say so earlier? Since it's like that, then you can stay at Cloudray City and be a servant for the Cloudray sect. You'll get an immortal token when you're able to earn sufficient immortal stones." A servant? Wang Lin's face revealed a wisp of rage when he heard this. Since they were able to cultivate to the point of ascension, all of them were existences that commanded the winds and the clouds in the mortal dimension. However, right after he just entered the immortal dimension, he was about to be reduced to a lowly servant, so how could he endure this? Not to mention him, even the others were stunned and revealed wisps of indignation. "You're courting death. Do you really think you're a great figure? Idiot! This isn't the mortal dimension, so there's no room for you to act wildly." His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when an iron whip suddenly appeared in the middle-aged man's hand, and it was coiled with the energy of profound laws as he directly whipped Wang Lin. Slap! Blood sprayed as Wang Lin let out a shrill howl as he flew over 30 m away. The skin and flesh on his back had split open to reveal a bone-deep injury that gurgled with fresh blood, and he instantly passed out. The expressions of everyone revealed shock when they saw this. The middle-aged man was obviously a heavenly immortal that had condensed the energy of the laws, so dealing with all of these newbies that had just ascended was simply as easy as trampling on ants. "Humph! Trash." The middle-aged man grunted coldly and didn't spare Wang Lin another glance before his gaze glanced coldly like a blade towards the others. And then he said, "All of you have seen what happened to him. I'll get to the point. Those without immortal stones, stand out obediently and don't waste the time of others." Everyone looked at each other, and in the end, a few more people stood out with dejected expressions. At this moment, even if they commanded the winds and the clouds and were filled with arrogance in the mortal dimension, they had no choice but to face reality, and this reality was that they were new to the immortal dimension, so it was better to obediently exercise forbearance. Ha ha ha! Senior's methods are great and impartial. It's truly admirable. Right at this moment, A group of 3 walked out while led by a young man. The young man wore a tall crown, possessed a noble, dignified, and graceful bearing, and he held a folding fan in his hand. A man and a woman followed by his side with respectful and submissive expressions, and they were obviously servants. This scene instantly shocked the other ascenders, because since he was able to bring servants along as he ascended, this fellow's identity was surely extremely respectable. The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed as he said, "I presume young master knows the rules of the immortal dimension?" Swish! The young master unfolded the fan in his hand and fanned it as he laughed lightheartedly, and then he said, "Of course, Xiao Yun from the Endless World's Solitary Origin Dao sect. These are my attendants. Senior, please record our arrival." As he spoke, the male and female attendants walked forward and handed over a storage pouch respectively. The Solitary Origin Dao sect. The middle-aged man and old man were stunned in unison before they put away the storage pouch, and their expressions eased up after checking it briefly. The Solitary Origin Dao sect? That's an extraordinary sect even in the immortal dimension. May I ask if young master's ancestor is related to Taoist Xiaolong? Xiao Yun roared with laughter. Senior is really wise. Taoist Xiaolong is my ancestor. Hiss! The middle-aged man and old man instantly gasped because Taoist Xiaolong was a great existence at the Golden Immortal Realm. Presently, he was the hottest figure in the entire Solitary Origin Dao sect. Even the Cloud Ray sect that stood behind them didn't dare offend him. Both of them instantly stood up and passed over 3 immortal tokens before they said with a smile, "I never imagined that it would be a descendant of Taoist Xiaolong. You really are a dragon amongst men and possess a striking appearance." This scene caused all of the other ascenders to feel extreme disdain, but no one dared to speak of it. Could be helped, one had to lower one's head in the territory of another. Seniors are really understanding. Ha ha ha. I won't disturb you any longer. Farewell. Xiao Yun glanced at the other ascenders with a complacent expression, and he was in high spirits as he waved his hand and intended to leave with his attendants. Wait! However, right at this moment, a sonorous voice that was like a thunderclap suddenly rumbled from the distance.